Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto has a black lightsaber last part. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Kyuubi walked through the forests of Hai no Kuni, decked out in a mottled green cloak, a red no-sleeved shirt with the kanji for 9 on the left breast and a pair of black pants with a red stripe along the seam. He was enjoying the breeze and the scenery. The birds were singing, the tree branches brushing against each other, and the bees were humming. Wait, I don't smell bees. Kyuubi turned off the path and headed deeper into the forest, searching for the source of the strange humming. The humming was accompanied by clashing sounds, increasing Kyuubi's curiosity. He reached out his hand and moved a leafy branch out of his path. His eyes widened at the sight of two people battling each other. Both were throwing pieces of the scenery at each other, using the terrain to their advantage. What Kyuubi noticed right away was they were not using their hands to toss the logs and rocks. What the hell? He took a closer look at their weapons, which seemed to be the source of the humming sound. Blades seemingly made of light tangled and buzzed as they attacked with ferocity, as if they were going for each other's throats. This keeps getting weirder and weirder, thought Kyuubi, watching through the bushes. A log came crashing through the bushes beside him, nearly making him jump 50 feet in the air. He took a deep breath as one of the combatants unleashed a lightning storm upon the other, making her dodge, one-handed cart-wheeling to the side as she thrust the other hand at his chest, making him crash into a tree. He pulled himself out of the tree before throwing his humming blade at the woman, spinning through the air in an arc. Not bad, he said, watching her dodge his throw by leaning back into a bridge. Too bad you've lost. Really? Asked the woman, resuming her recently interrupted upright position. I think you are seriously mistaken. Behind you. Kyuubi looked behind her head and noticed a floating metal cylinder, like the handles of the glowing weapons. He looked back to the man as he grinned, smirking in victory. The woman smiled, pointing behind him. He looked over to see 3 other metal cylinders, hovering inches from his face. I win, she said, slicing behind her with her glowing blue blade, cutting the cylinder behind her in half with a half-hearted swing. Fine, said the man, tossing his saber on the ground, a playful grin across his face. He shot out a hand and pulled it back, acting as if he had pulled an invisible rope, his eyes closed and brow furrowed in concentration. Kyuubi had begun to wonder what the gesture meant when the woman flew towards the man, as if a rope had been tied to her belt and had been pulled with great force. The man caught the woman and pulled her into a passionate kiss, hugging her tight against his body. She returned the kiss with the same fervor. Kyuubi shifted his feet, turning around to leave. He took a step forward only to hear a crack. He looked down to see the splintered remains of a twig. Ah, shit. Kyuubi had barely finished the thought as a pair of tree trunks crashed through the foliage, aimed at him. Kyuubi's eyes widened as he went on the evasive, jumping straight up into the boughs of the tree above. Both of the mysterious combatants burst through the bushes, looking for the source of the noise, who was currently hanging upside down above their heads. Both the woman knelt and lifted one of the logs, looking for a corpse. Not finding a corpse, the woman shook her head at the man. He closed his eyes and furrowed his brow in concentration. Kyuubi felt a touch in his mind, as if he had submersed his head in ice-cold water. At the same time, the man looked straight up, meeting Kyuubi's yellow-eyed stare. Hi? The man threw his sword at Kyuubi, its blade humming through the air. Kyuubi stepped left, still upside down, away from the tree. The blade flashed past. Kyuubi suddenly felt a feeling of weightlessness. He also noticed that the pair below him was growing closer at an alarming rate. He looked down and saw a burnt edge, formerly attached to the tree. Shit again. Kyuubi crouched on the rapidly descending branch and launched himself into the clearing. He heard the 2 nin follow him, landing behind him in attack stances. Kyuubi turned to face his opponents as he pulled off his traveling cloak and tossed it aside, drawing a pair of short swords from sheaths strapped to his sides. Holding both blades in a reverse grip, he dropped into his attack stance. The man pointed his blade at the ground, holding it one-handed in a loose grip, tracing a figure 8 in the grass. His red blade added a sinister glow to his dark leather clothes. The blade hummed as he walked forward, bringing it back over one shoulder to perform a slash. The woman held a blue blade in a reverse grip, crouched low to the ground, almost emulating his stance. Her blade threw blue light against her clothes, changing the near white to cerulean. She drifted left, moving slowly as not to attract attention. Kyubi raised his blades into an X block, anticipating the overhand slice. The man smiled as he swung. My saber will cut through those puny blades. He's dead, he just doesn't know it yet. Much to his surprise, Kyubi parried the blow with his knives. He pushed the saber to the right with one sword and struck out with the pommel of the blade in his right. The man, caught by surprise, didn't react fast enough and received a hilt to the solar plexus. His breath whooshed out as Kyubi spun around behind him and placed a dagger at his throat. Sorry about this, said Kyubi, preparing to slice open the man's jugular. The woman appeared out of nowhere, using her saber to slice Kyubi's arm off with a perfect chosun. It fell to the ground, the severed end burned by the saber, smoke rising from it. Kyubi leapt back, putting 20 feet between him and his opponents. He looked down at the remainder of his right arm. Ouch! The pair's eyes bugged out. His arm has been severed and all he says is, ouch. Kyubi laughed, shrugging his shoulders to loosen his muscles. Shall we begin again? He said, smirking at the pair. Their eyes bugged out further as his arm regenerated before their eyes. Kyubi flexed his arm, checking that he had regenerated every muscle correctly. He looked back at the pair. What, never met a demon before? He asked, reeling in a chakra thread to retrieve his fallen blade. A demon? Which tale are you? Asked the woman, straightening from her attack stance, though her blade was still active. I am Kyubi no Kitsune, he replied, drawing himself up to his full height, plastering a feral smirk across his face. Who are you, human? The man strode forward, placing himself between Kyubi and the woman. I am Takanomo Seigen. This is my wife, Aiko. Why were you spying on us? Kyubi replaced his swords into his rib sheaths. I was just walking along when I heard the humming of your weapons. At first, I thought it was just bees. With no bees around, I decided that there might be something interesting around. I guess I was right. You gonna be hostile? Asked Seigen, raising his saber and adopting a new stance, prepared if Kyubi chose to attack. No, I'm not. I am curious, however, about the nature of your weapons and powers, said Kyubi, walking over to where his cloak laid across a bush. Shrugging back into it, he walked over to the couple. I swear on my honor as a demon lord I will not attack you unless provoked. Do we have an accord? He said, holding out his hand. Seigen deactivated his saber and clasped hands with the demon lord. Deal. Excellent. Now, shall we sit and talk a while? I have traveled far and am somewhat weary of non-stop travel. Present. So you trained with them, learning how to use the force and then left? Asked Hinata, staring at Kyubi. That's it? Yes. I didn't meet up with them until 5 years later, when I killed Seigen, said Kyubi, a frown darkening his face. 295 years ago. Kyubi was practicing with his dual short swords, still trying to get the hang of the Jarkai style Aiko had taught him 5 years ago. After 5 years of practice, he still had a lot to learn if he were to ever become a master of this art. He froze as a presence entered the circle of his perception. It felt vile, foul, as if the filth of 1,000 years stained the soul of the person approaching. Maybe a former master who fell into darkness, like Seigen had told me about, thought Kyubi, straightening from his Jarkai form to stand with his blades clasped loosely at his sides. The abominable aura came closer, entering the clearing opposite to Kyubi. Clad in black leather, his face was shadowed by the evening sun. Kyubi, it said, the voice raspy and coarse. It has been too long. I would remember a soul so foul. You are no friend of mine. Leave, I have no need of your taint. The cloaked figure laughed, doubling over at Kyubi's words. Don't know me? I trained you he shouted, throwing back his hood. Kyubi's eyes widened as he looked upon his former teacher, Seigen. His eyes had turned a sinister yellow, his face wrinkled, and his hair dead-looking and white. His clothes remained the same, though they shimmered ominously with dark power. What has happened to you? When I left you, you were with Aiko, your soul pure, filled with purpose. I found a new power, one that overwhelms the power of the light. The dark side of the force, Seigen said, throwing away his cloak and calling the saber off his belt into his hand. It activated, extending the red blade Kyubi remembered so well. Let's see if you've lost your skill, said Seigen, disappearing. Kyubi raised a blade above his head, blocking the descending saber, the blade supported by his forearm. The problem with your saber is that when push comes to shove, I can support my blades. You can't, said Kyubi, using his other hand to slash at Sagan's unprotected torso. Sagan jumped back quickly, disappearing once again, avoiding the slash. You're still too slow, Kyubi _ you'll have to move faster than that. Kyubi smiled as he, too, disappeared. He reappeared in an instant behind his opponent, smiling as he tapped the flat of his blade on Sagan's shoulder. You really want me to move faster? Really? Go to hell, Kitsune Teme, spat Sagan as he spun through a quick 360, attempting to take off Kyubi's arm. Kyubi smiled as he sped to the left, leaving an afterimage for Sagan to cut. Ooh, resorting to name-calling already? You call yourself a master? Said Kyubi, kicking Sagan in the ribs, releasing his chakra at the instant of contact to send him flying through the air. Sagan felt pain blossom in his chest as his ribs cracked. Ouch, that's gotta hurt, said Kyubi, using one hand to shade his eyes as Sagan crashed into a tree. Want to try again? That was a fluke, a miracle. You'll never be able to do that again, shouted Sagan, calling more lightsabers off his belt. The handles floated in midair, activating in unison. My powers have doubled since we last met. Kyubi looked at the forest of sabers and grinned. Good. Twice the pride, double the fall. The blades flew at Kyubi, spinning through the air like pinwheels of death. Sagan himself charged Kyubi along with his other blades, hoping that the barrage of blades would beat down his defenses long enough for him to land a killing blow. Kyubi dropped into a Soresu stance and seemed to effortlessly bat away the sabers. He smiled as he crossed blades with Sagan himself, sneering at his former teacher over the lethal saber blade. When I left you I was but the learner, but now, I am the master. I will kill you, growled Sagan, pushing Kyubi's blade up, using the force to call a lightsaber blade towards Kyubi's chest. Kyubi disappeared, causing Sagan to stumble at the loss of opposite pressure. Kyubi appeared atop a tree, crouched with both blades at his side. Do not attempt to fight me further, Sagan. Your powers are no match for me, said Kyubi, his face grim. He sensed the end of the duel was close, though he regretted what he may be forced to do. You understate my power, replied Sagan, approaching the tree while still on the ground. Kyubi sensed him gather the force, no doubt preparing for a force-powered leap. Don't try it, Sagan. I do not want to kill you, said Kyubi, straightening from his crouch. He replaced his blades in their respective chest sheaths before pulling a metal cylinder from the back of his neck. With the push of a button, a green blade extended from the handle accompanied by a snap hiss. Sagan growled, glowering at Kyubi from his low position. With a grunt of effort, he launched himself at Kyubi. Kyubi sighed, knowing this was the end, and executed a hated move, the Moke. He swept his blade, quickly slashing 4 times in the air, dismembering Sagan with circular motions of his saber. Sagan bounced off the tree branch, unable to stay on top of the branch due to lack of limbs. He landed on the ground with a thump, closely followed by the 4 thumps accompanying the descent of his arms and legs. Told you, said Kyubi, looking down at the screaming Sagan, his body writhing in pain on the ground below, screaming bloody murder. I hate you, shouted Sagan, squirming around in the dirt, agony making his body arch. Kyubi jumped down to stand above his former teacher. With a look of pity, he lifted his saber, the green illuminating the sadness on his face. Goodbye, old friend. With a quick slash, a textbook side chaw, Sagan's head rolled free of his body. Dark power exploded from his corpse, sending Kyubi across the clearing. He looked up in time to see the corpse of his former friend and teacher burned to ash, consumed by the dark power released by his death. Kyubi hung his head, tears forming in his eyes. I should have been able to solve it without his death. No, you couldn't have, said Aiko, appearing at his side, grief apparent on her face. I tried to make him come back to the light, but the dark side had too strong of a hold on him. I wish it could have ended differently. So do I, Aiko. So do I, said Kyubi, drawing his short blades. Using the force, he dug a quick grave and put Sagan ashes in it. After covering the tomb, Kyubi stuck both blades into the earth. Kyubi and Aiko walked away, leaving the blades as a marker for their comrade's grave. Words were carved onto the blades, done by Kyubi before he turned away. In memory of Sagan, a loving husband, a good friend, and a Shisho no Chikara. Present, those blades are still in the forest, marking his place for all of time, said Kyubi, looking at each in turn. Remember this warning. The dark side is seductive, seemingly more powerful and very corrupted. I have only heard of someone turning back from the dark side once, he said, looking sideways at Naruto, yellow eyes watching his reaction. I'll keep that in mind, growled Naruto, twisting to stretch his back as he glared back at Kyubi. After his back had popped a few times, he looked at Hinata and Sasuke, who shared looks of confusion. Thanks a lot, Kyubi. Don't mention it, Naruto sighed. When I was in Kei's no Kuni, I made a little name for myself, he said, pulling a bamboo flute from a seal on the shoulder of his cloak. He placed it on the ground, a frown marring his features. I got this in my travels in Kei's no Kuni. I turned to the dark side. 7 weeks ago, a caravan trundled through the desert, delivering supplies to the Kusagakure. The sand made it hard for the wagons to be moved, but they had to make do. On the other side of a sand dune, a group of 20 men stood, waiting for their lookout signal. Once the sentry signaled them, they would charge over the dune and loot the caravan. A sharp whistle sounded through the desert. Hearing the signal, the men sprang over the dune, drawing katana and other types of blades. Incoming _ shouted one of the caravan's guards, drawing his sword. The 4 other guards swarmed to his sides, drawing their weapons as well. As a united front, they faced the enemy, knowing they didn't stand a chance. The band of thieves threw themselves down the slope and engaged the guards, using the numbers to overwhelm. While 3 or 4 would distract one guard, a 5th would circle around and backstab the guard. In the end, the bandits lost 5 and the guards were dead. The civilians shook in fear as the bandits began to loot one of the wagons. One bandit walked over to another wagon and threw back the covering. He smiled as he saw a woman and her daughter, grasping each other in fear. What do we have here? He asked of himself, a disgusting leer on his face. Distracted by the repulsive fantasies bouncing about in his head, he didn't notice a sandy-colored figure rise up beside him, a leather mask covering his eyes. Through a slit, blue eyes could be seen, anger and revulsion in his gaze. Without mercy, Naruto cleared his blade and stabbed the man through the heart, his blade emerging from the other side of the man coated red with the life-giving liquid. The woman and her daughter screamed, trying to scoot further back into the shadows of the cart. The noise alarmed the other bandits and made them approach. Naruto pushed the man off his blade and turned to face the other bandits. Bowing his head, he raised his hand and flicked his fingers. The sand beneath their feet sprang into the air, blinding them as they charged Naruto. Their visibility was reduced to a few feet in any direction. Where the fuck is he? Shouted one of the bandits, peering in vain to try and discern friend from foe. He heard a whirling sound before his head dropped off his shoulders, eyes dead to the world. The mother and daughter flinched as each new scream of agony split the air, unable to see anything because of the abrupt sandstorm. After 3 minutes, the sandstorm began to die out, slowing as quickly as it had come. The daughter and her mother pushed aside the flap of the wagon and looked out. Naruto shook sand from his hair, pulling off the mask he wore to allow him to see in the force-created sandstorm. I really should put some seals into my cloak that will repulse sand. The other civilians peered out of their wagons, seeing the carnage wrought by a single man. The bandits lay in heaps on the ground, their blood staining the golden sand crimson. Heads, hands and legs lay distances from their owners, leaking blood onto the ground. One of the civvies puked, others looked on in horror as the Deathbringer turned back to them. Relax, I am not here to harm you. Who are you? Asked the caravan leader, trying to look threatening but failing miserably due to his beer gut wobbling with every step forward. A squelch was heard as he stepped in front of Naruto. Watch out for that guy's brain, said Naruto, looking down at the leader's feet. The fat man leapt back, trying to see his foot but was unable to see it due to the aforementioned gut. I was merely passing along when I noticed your caravan. Since your guards were dead, I thought I might lend a hand, said Naruto, sliding his sword into its back sheath. Well, on behalf of my caravan and my passengers, I thank you, Gaijin-sama, said the leader, bowing as much as he was able. Naruto surveyed the damage, noting a few destroyed boxes. Since you have no defenses, I will accompany you to Kusagakure. Arigato, Gaijin-sama, move out, shouted the leader. The caravans creaked into motion, beginning to move once again towards their destination. Naruto created 10 clones, much to the surprise of one of the civvies. Cage Bunshin? Thought the man, thinking of his time amongst the ninja villages. The journey was quick and uneventful, no other ambushes awaiting them. The caravan passed over a dune, within sight of the walls of Kusagakure. Naruto turned to the leader. You will be safe now. Arigato, Gaijin-sama. Naruto turned to wander back out into the desert, but he stopped short due to a mother and her daughter blocking his path. They bowed to him, saying, Arigato, Gaijin-sama. Please, stop bowing to me, said Naruto, replacing his mask. I was able to help. Therefore, I did. Simple as that. The daughter reached behind her back and pulled a flute from her obi. She held it up to him in silent offering. Naruto smiled as he knelt down to her eye level. Arigato, young one. Present. When did you turn? You saved the caravan. You didn't fall prey to the dark side, said Sasuke, confused once again. What happened afterwards was the problem. Back in the past again. 3 days later, Naruto was running through the desert, his physical training upped once again by Kyuubi. Note to self. Rethink Kyuubi's control of my physical training regimen. End note. A smell drifted across his path, filling his nose with a familiar scent. The bitter, metallic smell of spilt blood. Something has happened. I should check it out. Gathering the force and leaping over a number of dunes, Naruto landed in the sand, stained blood red by the blood of the innocents' bodies laid out before him. I know this man, thought Naruto as he crouched next to one of the corpses. He was one of the caravan merchants. A feeling of dread filled him as he began to recognize more and more of the deceased. His pace quickened as he found more familiar faces, their voices forever silenced. He stopped before a pile of corpses covered by a tarp, their accumulated blood bleeding through the cloth. Please, don't let it be them, thought Naruto as he pulled back the tarp. The bodies of the women who accompanied the caravan lay beneath the tarp, their throats slashed, some so deep they were nearly decapitated. Their clothing was torn and ragged, slashed as if someone had taken a blade to them. Through a torn kimono, bruises could be seen, slashes from blades on arms and legs, and hand-shaped bruises on faces. Naruto inhaled again. There, another scent, blotted out by the blood. Semen? Naruto's mind clicked, the pieces falling into place. If I am not mistaken, these women have been raped. What animal would do this? Naruto felt a new power, something darker, sinister almost, rise up from within him. What is this? My anger is fueling my force connection? Naruto grinned, feeling the power that this new source gave him. He looked up at a wagon and caught his reflection in a shattered mirror. His eyes were a sulfuric yellow, not even close to Kyuubi's yellow, something sinister and evil. The only problem was that Naruto didn't care. I will find who did this, and destroy them. Naruto recovered the bodies and turned back to the desert, stretching out with his feelings to find the evil ones who would stain their hands with the blood of the innocent. Ah, there they are, thought Naruto, swiveling to face west. My prey is waiting, it would be a shame to keep them waiting. Naruto disappeared, ripples flowing through the air as he shot off to find the murderers. Their time is about to run out. Later that day, Naruto stumbled into the cave, exhausted, both physically and mentally. Kyuubi looked up from the scrolls he and the other Cage Bunshin were reading, taking in the beaten-up look about Naruto. What happened? He asked, walking over to duck under Naruto's arm, half carrying him to his bed. Didn't I tell you not to overdo it? Naruto just looked at Kyuubi, a flicker of darkness across his face. Kyuubi stepped back, having seen that look before. Or was it something else? You remember the caravan I helped? Asked Naruto, staring at the floor. Yeah, you saved them from a group of bandits. What about it? They're dead, said Naruto, pulling the flute from his shoulder seal. He looked at it for a moment before playing a haunting melody. After Naruto had finished the song, Kyuubi asked, what happened? Found them in the desert while I was doing laps. Bodies strewn about, blood everywhere. Anything not worth stealing was destroyed in one way or another. But that's not the worst part, said Naruto, his grip on the rock of the cave tightening to the point that dust began to float down. Kyuubi's thoughts ran straight to the worst-case scenario. The women of the caravan, they were raped, weren't they? Yeah, replied Naruto, tears beginning a descent down his cheeks. Even the girl who gave this to me. Raped, then killed. Where are the fuckers? Said Kyuubi, drawing his lightsabers. Not even a truly evil demon would do such a thing. I'm gonna kill them. I already took care of it. Scenes of violence flashed through Kyuubi's head, Naruto using the force to send him his memories. 10 minutes of memories flowed into Kyuubi's head. Kyuubi turned to Naruto, raising the saber handle. The power you used, it was the dark side. I know, I used it for good though. I wiped those pathetic wastes from this world. It was an act of good. Wrong, said Kyuubi, pinning Naruto against the wall with one hand while readying the saber with the other. That is just the beginning. Next, you will thirst for battle. Destruction and death will be your path. You think it will be for the good of the world, but, in reality, you are only causing harm. No light can come forth from the dark side. Only the light can help the world. Naruto hung his head, his tears redoubling. He slumped down against the wall, the actions of the day overwhelming him. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm sorry I turned my back on what you taught me. You came back though. I've never seen someone come back from the shadow ways. How did you do it? Naruto got up and went to the entrance of the cave. The reason I gave up the dark side was because of one person, he said, looking out at the setting sun. That person was me? You turned your back on the dark side for me? Asked Hinata, gaping at her boyfriend. Sasuke was undergoing a similar reaction, though he recovered quickly and rolled his eyes. Yeah, pretty much, said Naruto dismissively, as if it was no big deal. I finished killing the bandits and was searching for someone else to kill. I found a caravan, all set up for the night. I could have killed them, Naruto said, shuddering at the memory. He came so close to slaughtering the innocent he scared himself. He took a breath and calmed himself, then continued. But something stopped me. A memory of a young woman, someone who was the first person, other than the Hokage, to show me kindness, said Naruto, returning his flute to the seal on his shoulder. He smiled at her in his fox-like way, eyes filled with love. Kyuubi was doing the same, minus the love part. That is what brought me back. He stood and offered his hands to his friends. Come on, lunch is over in a minute. We have to get back, he said, pulling them to their feet. After a quick kiss from Hinata, they jumped off the roof. Naruto used the force to give himself some momentum, turning several flips in midair. Hinata rolled her eyes at his antics, smiling at her boyfriend. Using the force, Naruto rebounded off the air itself and caught Hinata in his arms. He landed on one knee, light on his feet like a cat, Hinata safe in his arms. Sasuke was shaking his head, amused at the couple's antics. You would think I would get used to the sappiness of those two, he thought as he landed in the same way, crouched like a predator on the hunt. Sasuke-kun! Shouted a crowd of fangirls, Sakura and Ino at the head of the horde. All the girls had hearts in their eyes, staring dreamily at the object of their affection. Oh, for the love of Kami, muttered Sasuke under his breath. Looking back at Hinata and Naruto, who were now leaning against the wall in each other's arms, he said, I'll be back in a sec. Gotta lose the pests. Sasuke shot off, leaving a dust trail behind him and a mass of fangirls chasing him and declaring their undying love. Naruto and Hinata were smirking as the true Sasuke unhanged from the pebble he'd used as a cover. Naruto, I have to thank you, once again, for teaching me shadow clones, said Sasuke, bowing slightly to Naruto. Naruto smirked, lifted Hinata and began carrying her to the classroom, via the scenic route. Don't mention it. Oh, hell no. I know that look. Get your asses in gear. I am not missing Genin assignment because you two are making out, said Sasuke, pulling Naruto away by his collar, forcing him to let go of his lavender-eyed love. Hinata giggled as Naruto stared up at Sasuke, pouting slightly at the loss of his special time with Hinata. The group of three entered the class a minute before the bell went, as did several others, including Kiba, Shino, Shikamaru and Choji. At the bell, there were a few people missing. Most noticeable absences. Almost all the female students. After the bell rang, Sasuke began to twitch violently. Hinata stared at him, wondering what could make her friend twitch that badly. She looked over to her blonde love and noticed he was shaking as well, though his shakes were due to withholding laughter. What happened? Asked Hinata, staring at Naruto. Naruto only shook harder, now violently shuddering. Hinata glared at Naruto, making him swallow his laughter. After a few seconds, he pushed his laughter back to reply. Sasuke's clone got captured by the fangirls. Every person present winced, barely able to imagine such torture. Iruka wrote a note on his clipboard to suggest fangirl exposure to any ninja undergoing interrogation. Interrogation room. Ibiki, known as the sadist, looked up from an iwa-nin he was currently working on. He smiled, sensing things were going to become much more painful for his subjects. "I sense a disturbance in the force," he said, reiterating a line he heard from a certain blonde. Back at the academy, the class had finally been rounded up, all useless fangirls found. "I wish they would have just let them die somewhere," thought Naruto, shaking his head. Fangirls like Sakura give all kunoichi a bad name. When those girls get out into the field, if they make it that far, they're gonna get themselves killed or worse. Iruka was working at his desk as Jonin instructors began to come into the room, looking for their teams. Iruka would converse with them for a minute or two before calling out their teams. A woman with black hair walked in, wearing a battle dress that seemed to be made of one sheet of cloth with an odd black pattern to it. She had one red sleeve on her right arm while the other was bare, both hands wrapped in bandages from the elbow to her knuckles. She chatted with Iruka for a minute before turning to look over the genin with her piercing red eyes. "Team 8, this is your sensei, Yuhi Kurenai," said Iruka, calling her team. Shino, Kiba and Hinata stood and began walking over to Kurenai. Hinata looked back when she stopped in front of her sensei alone, wondering where her teammates were. "Kiba, Shino, take care of her for me, okay?" asked Naruto, leaning over the desk to talk to his friends. Kiba and Shino both nodded. Naruto knew they would look after her, both having the air of brotherly protectiveness about them. They would defend her to the death, and Kami helped the poor soul who decided to mess with the combined might of Aburame Shino and Inuzuka Kiba. The two teens walked over to their teacher and left. Naruto leaned back and sighed as he watched his love walk out of the room, observing the gentle sway of her hips as she left. The door closed behind her, leaving Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura alone with Iruka. After 3 hours, Naruto had begun tapping a pencil against the desk, waiting for his tardy sensei. The sounds of the pencil echoed through the classroom, starting to annoy the pink-haired banshee. "Remain calm, Naruto. We can always kill him later," said Kyuubi, noting how bored his host was becoming. "I better get him doing something soon. Bad things happen when he's bored." "What happens if he is a she?" asked Naruto, picking up speed with his tapping, sensing the kunoichi of the team growing close to the snapping point. Naruto cracked a grin as Kyuubi began to ponder this newest conundrum. What to do, what to do? Hey, someone approaches. "Pray to Kami, it's our sensei," thought Naruto as Sakura chose this moment to speak up, and when Sakura speaks up, it's usually a banshee-like shriek. "Naruto, stop tapping already. If you tap that pencil one more time, I'll send you to the hospital." Outside the classroom, Hitaki Kakashi, former Anbu captain, Jonin of Konaha, dressed in black clothing and the Chunin flak vest with his Hite-8 over his left eye, walked down the corridor towards the classroom that held his newest batch of students. "Hopefully, they will be better than the last set I attempted to train," he thought, reaching for the door handle. "Naruto, stop tapping already. If you tap that pencil one more time, I'll send you to the hospital." Kakashi froze as he heard the threat towards his little friend. The tapping stopped. As Kakashi opened the door, the tapping began once again, 3 times faster. Kakashi suddenly found himself on the receiving end of a punch, sending him crashing into a desk. He looked over his attacker, a pink-haired Haruno Kunoichi, who was now rubbing her fist after glancing it off his Hite-8. He looked back to the door to see Naruto disguising a laugh as a cough. A look to the left found an Uchiha grinning, his black eyes alight with amusement. Kakashi picked himself up and walked over to Naruto, giving an evil glare as he did so. Staring at Naruto with his uncovered eye, he asked, "Team 7? "Yep, Uzumaki Naruto, at your service, Inu-sensei. How'd the Kawarimi feel?" Kakashi was shocked at Naruto, not expecting him to recognize him so easily. He hid his surprise, placing his hand on his chin in a thinking position. "My first impression of you all. I hate you," he said, causing the Haruno to slump on the desk. Sasuke and Naruto, however, looked happy. "I sense a disturbance in the force," thought Kakashi, looking at his 2 male students. Meet me on the roof, he said before using a shunshin to disappear. The roof. Kakashi pulled out his prized orange book and began reading. It'll take them a few minutes to get up here. Might as well enjoy it. Boo! Kakashi shot up into the air, easily jumping 30 feet in the air. As he traveled upwards, he looked down to see his opponent, someone who had enough skill to sneak up on him without his knowledge. You know, if we were in the field, you'd have been dead, called Naruto, smirking at the successful prank, clothing flapping around in the wind. Funny, Naruto, very funny. I thought so. So, what are we doing up here? He asked, looking around at the village. His eyes fell on the Hokage monument, looking over the four faces, stopping at the fourth's face. I'll make you proud, Tucson. I thought it would be good to get to know one another, share likes and dislikes. Sure, here comes Sasuke and Haruno, said Naruto, turning to look at the stairs. Sasuke walked calmly up the stairs, acting as if he had been walking for 30 seconds rather than 5 minutes, upstairs. Sakura, however, was gasping for breath, hanging onto the handrail. Kakashi, Naruto and Sasuke looked at each other before shaking their heads. I have a lot of work cut out for me, thought Kakashi, looking at the poor excuse for a kunoichi. Okay, have a seat, commanded Kakashi, gesturing towards the steps while he took a seat on the railing. When they complied, he spoke again. Since we're on a team, I thought it might be useful to take some time to get to know one another. So, tell me a little about yourselves. Like what? Asked Sakura, confused despite her supposedly high IQ. He means your favorite thing, what you hate most, dreams, ambitions, hobbies, stuff like that, said Naruto. A look of annoyance crossing his face as he explained something so simple to the supposed kunoichi of the year. He looked skyward as Sakura seemed to understand, thanking Kami that there were some active brain cells in her head. Why, don't you go first? Show us how it's done. Naruto slapped his forehead, once again surprised at the depths of the pink-haired teen's stupidity. Sasuke mirrored his position, rubbing his head in one hand. Oh, me? I am Hitaki Kakashi. I'm the kind of person who doesn't feel like talking about his likes and dislikes, he said, earning himself a grin from both Naruto and Sasuke while Sakura looked miffed at his explanation. My dreams for the future are none of your business, but, anyway, I have a lot of hobbies. Sakura looked like she was going insane while Naruto and Sasuke smirked at her. Kakashi couldn't help but join in, it was too easy to mess with this girl. Alright, you on the right, tell us about yourself, said Kakashi, looking at Naruto. Naruto grinned as he began to speak. I am Uzumaki Naruto. I like stuff. I hate stuff. I have hobbies. I have dreams. Sasuke began to chuckle as Naruto finished, recognizing the vague look. He's thinking of Hinata again. Kakashi smiled at his little friend. Still being a pain in the ass, Naruto? Good for you. Uchiha, you're next. I am Uchiha Sasuke. I like things. I hate things. I have dreams. I have hobbies. It was Naruto's turn to hold in a laugh as Sakura turned red in anger, both her teammates giving the exact same info as her teacher, their name. She also felt a twinge of disappointment since Sasuke didn't say what he liked specifically. I hope it's me. And finally, the young lady. I am Haruno Sakura. The thing I like is, well, the person I like is, and, my dream for the future is, she said, her blush growing steadily deeper as she continued to speak. Naruto was contemplating suicide as he picked up on what her dream was. Anyone got a guess? I hate Naruto, continued Sakura, staring at her crush. My hobby is stalking the last Uchiha, finished Naruto, grinning at Sasuke, who suddenly had the urge to ask Naruto for barrier and alarm seals. Right. Stalking Sasuke-kun. Hey, she shouted in outrage, glaring at the blonde. Am I right? Asked Naruto, looking her dead in the eyes. Sakura blushed deeply. I rest my case, said Naruto. He turned to Sasuke and held out his hand. Pay up. Sasuke reached into his ninja pouch and pulled a wad of bills and put them in Naruto's outstretched hand. Lucky guess, he whispered, glaring at Naruto with his onyx eyes. Don't mess with a mind reader. We'll win every time, replied Naruto, stowing the bills in one of his arm seals. Okay, enough. Tomorrow, we'll start our duties as shinobi, said Kakashi, crossing his arms as leaned back on the railing. Yay, what are we going to do, Kakashi-sensei? Asked Sakura. Our mission will include only the members of this cell. What type of mission? Survival training, said Naruto, leaning forward, pulling a whisper knife and a hunk of wood from seals under his cloak. Right, Kakashi-sensei? Correct, Naruto, though this is no ordinary survival training exercise. You will be surviving against me. Figures. Growled Naruto, slicing a piece of unneeded wood from the rest. This should be finished by nightfall, he thought as he shook his head. The Hokage wants to see how well we work, doesn't he? Yes, he does, said Kakashi. He looked down and began to chuckle. Naruto's grin widened as he read Kakashi's mind, getting info in his special way. This will be interesting, thought Naruto, continuing to slowly shave the wood into art. What's so funny, Kakashi-sensei? Out of the 27 teams, only 9 of them will be chosen to become genin. The rest will be sent back to the academy for further training. This test has a fail rate of over 66%. Sakura was losing her cool, worrying about the fact that if she failed, she'd never be able to be with her Sasuke-kun. Naruto, once again, contemplated shoving a kunai in his head. You can block out her mind, you know. Thank you, Kami, thought Naruto as he put up mental force shields around Sakura's head, blocking her thoughts from being broadcasted to him. He sighed as blissful silence entered his mind. Kakashi pulled 3 forms out of his flak jacket. These pages have your mission parameters on it. Memorize them. Tomorrow, bring all your ninja tools, he said, forming the seals for a shunshin. Pausing on the last seal, he said, I suggest you don't eat breakfast, or else you'll be throwing it back up. Sakura quickly looked over the paper she received, memorizing everything she could. If I fail this, I'll be separated from my Sasuke-kun. This is a test of my love. She looked up to see Naruto and Sasuke walk to the edge of the roof and jump off, leaving her alone atop the academy. She ran to the rail and saw both of them land on the ground as if they had just stepped off a staircase. Naruto stopped Sasuke for a moment. Eat breakfast. Shinobi need the energy to give it their all. Giving up the most important meal of the day is not an option. Sasuke nodded, thinking along the same lines. I'll see you tomorrow then. Both split up, Sasuke for his home in the Uchiha complex and Naruto to a certain training ground, following a presence he knew very well and a scent that was damn near intoxicating. Training Ground 8, Kiba and Shino had finished working on their clan jutsus and decided to go home, waving goodbye to Hinata as she looked up from the training post she was currently striking. The team meeting had gone well. They introduced themselves and had learned of the genin test they would be taking tomorrow, the final test between them and their goal, the rank of a ninja. Using Juken strikes, she systematically destroyed the post, reducing it to fall in splinters and chunks of wood. Breathing heavily, she stepped back and surveyed her work. The 3 training posts that had been in the training ground were reduced to sawdust and there were circles carved in the dirt where she had been practicing the kaiden. Not bad for today. I wonder where Naruto is, she thought leaning against a tree. You know, there's something about a woman reducing training posts to dust that is downright why, growled Naruto, sitting in the tree above Hinata, still carving that piece of wood. It had begun to take on a cylindrical appearance, thought it appeared far from done. Hinata blushed, cheeks turning rosy red. Hello, Naruto-kun, how did meeting your sensei go? Asked Hinata, jumping up to Naruto's tree branch. She sat on the branch, facing the same way as he was, admiring the view. Naruto quickly placed his carving and his knife in their respective places and grabbed Hinata's hand and pulled her into his chest. His arms encircled her, securing her in his grasp. Hinata leaned back into his chest and sighed in contentment. Life can't get much better than this. Naruto smiled as he pressed a kiss in Hinata's neck. Informative. One of my good friend from the Anbu is going to teach me. It should be fine, though when we get into a fight, Sasuke and I will have to watch out for our weakest link. Hinata tilted her head so that she could look him in the eyes. It shouldn't be too hard for you and Sasuke, should it? She asked, smiling into her love's cerulean eyes. No, it shouldn't, replied Naruto, tilting his head as he went for a kiss. It was light, like a butterfly's wings, just enough pressure for Hinata to know it was there. Hinata smiled as she stretched to return the kiss, twisting in Naruto's arms to press against him, enjoying the feeling of the ridges of his muscles through his shirt. She moaned as he kissed her with such passion that it made her toes curl as waves of pleasure arced through her body. Naruto opened his mouth and traced Hinata's lower lip. Hinata responded in kind, opening her mouth and kissing each other, their tongues battling for dominance. Hinata shivered as Naruto rubbed her back, easing the tensed muscles as he kissed her. "Anbu incoming," said Kyuubi, sensing the approach of one of the Sandame's personal assassins, guards. Naruto pulled back and looked skyward. "You enjoy screwing with me, don't you?" In heaven, Kami was laughing her ass off along with her brother, the Shinigami. Back on Earth, a poof of smoke heralded the arrival of an Anbu. The ninja masked with a porcelain mask shaped like an ox looked up into the tree, sensing the chakra signature of Hyuga Hinata, but not the one he was searching for, Uzumaki Naruto. "Where is he? Hyuga-sama, have you seen Uzumaki-san?" he asked, climbing up the tree like a spider, coming to eye level with Hinata. "Look up, Anbu." Ox looked up and saw Naruto, hanging from a branch by his feet. "What does the Anbu want with me?" he asked, annoyance coloring his voice. "This had better be quick. I can see the Anbu's life growing shorter by the minute." "The council has summoned you," said the Anbu, still wondering why he couldn't sense him, even at this range. "Very well. I shall attend the meeting," said Naruto, sensing that the Anbu would not take "no" for an answer. "I'll be there in a few minutes. The council wanted you there immediately, Uzumaki-san." "Words cannot describe how little I give a damn," replied Naruto, glaring at the eye slits in the white mask. "Deliver the message that I will be there in a few minutes." The Anbu left, leaving the two teens alone. Naruto sighed in frustration, still hanging upside down from the tree branch. Looking at Hinata, he caressed her cheek with one hand. "I hope to continue this later, Hinata-heim." Hinata caught his hand and pulled him towards her, claiming a passionate kiss. After 30 seconds of making out, they both came up for air and parted ways. Hinata to the Hyuga compound and Naruto to the council chambers. "Council chambers? Where is that brat?" asked Warai Kasara, a civilian council member, in outrage. "How dare that demon spawn make us wait?" They had been waiting for about 20 minutes since the ox-masked Anbu had gotten back. Sarutobi sighed, rubbing his forehead as he answered. "Naruto will be along in a minute." "That's what you said 10 minutes ago," shouted another civilian. The council was currently growing more and more frustrated. The meeting had been called because of Naruto's powers. And yet the subject of the meeting is not here. Naruto was, in fact, in the room, standing beside the Hokage's seat, leaning on it trying not to laugh. "I love force illusions," he thought as he walked into the center of the room. With a flourish of his cloak, Naruto revealed himself, using the force to make it seem he had formed out of the shadows surrounding him. Turning to the Hokage, he bowed. "You summoned me, GG? Watch your tongue, demon brat. This is the Hokage and you will show the proper respect," said Kasara, glaring at the blonde-haired Jinchuriki, radiating hatred. Naruto returned the glare, lacing it with copious amounts of killing intent, one of Naruto's favorite techniques, besides the force, of course. Killing intent, the accumulation of fear stimulus, was created by hundreds of small movements. Slightly narrowing the eyes, tensing the right muscles in succession, the way the head was tilted, the baring of teeth, that type of thing. I kinda borrowed this explanation from Never Cut Twice by Shadowmaster 62, a very well-written Naruto fanfic. Check it out if you get the chance. Needless to say, the council shut up, some nearly fainting at the sheer amount of killing intent in the air. Even the ninja on the council felt faint at Naruto's killing intent. Hiyashi was shocked by the ability. Usually, killing intent was rarely used by Jonin, not some 15-year-old soon-to-be genin. "What is he?" "I am here at your request, Jackie Ketsu. Do not tell me how to conduct myself unless you want a meeting with the sharp end of my sword," said Naruto, pulling the hilt of his stick sword out of a seal at his waist, unsheathing it about a foot. "I could leave whenever the hell I want and none of you could stop me." The killing intent dissipated as quickly as it had been unleashed, allowing the council to breathe. Naruto relaxed all the little motions he had used, though he left his fangs bared. "So, what does the mighty council want with me?" Danzo, one of the oldest on the council, stood. "He looks like shit," thought Naruto, looking over Danzo's war-torn body. Bandages were wrapped around one eye, giving him a slightly intimidating look. The old war hawk had also lost an arm long ago, using a black cloak to cover the stump, adding the intimidation. That is, of course, if Naruto was able to be intimidated. "Please, this guy needs to die. He thinks that will intimidate me?" I was trained by the ultimate teacher of killing intent. Thank you for the compliment, said Kyuubi, watching through Naruto's eyes. Kyuubi narrowed his eyes at Danzo, sensing the darkness of his soul. He is evil to the core. Keep an eye on him. You have been summoned because you seem to have powers that have not been seen by any ninja before you, said Danzo in a rough voice. And how, pray tell, are you privy to this information? Asked Naruto, glaring at Danzo, drawing on a minuscule amount of Kyuubi's chakra, making his eyes flash red. Testimony from one of the academy teachers. She swears that you threw 20 shuriken without touching them, having them float in the air before hitting the target. You mean like this? Asked Naruto, tapping into the force. Every kunai, shuriken and whisper knife he had on his person floated into the air, blades aimed Danzo. Naruto smiled at the fear showing in Danzo's one eye. Is this that power you suspect I have? It's quite simple actually. Chakra strings are used to make the weapons float. Naruto, please stop threatening Danzo, said the Hokage. Naruto replaced his weapons, still glaring at Danzo. Are there any questions? Asked Naruto, looking at each of the council members. At Hiyoshi's raised hand, he nodded at the Hyuga clan head. Yes, you have a question? What else can you do, besides the floating weapon technique? He asked, Byakugan activating. Surprise crossed his face when he couldn't see Naruto's chakra coils. As you can see, Hyuga-san, you cannot see my tenketsu, not my chakra coils. Nara Shikaku leaned forward, looking over the blonde. He's not telling us everything, he thought, his scarred brow furrowing as he began to ponder on this new mystery. Of course I'm not, Nara-san. I have other powers, including the ability to read someone's mind, said Naruto, surprising the council by answering the Nara clan head's thoughts. Naruto turned to another civilian member of the council, a dark-haired, pale-skinned man with a permanent sneer-like face. Now, reading your mind is much more interesting. Naruto, what are you talking about? Asked the Sandame. I know he can read minds, but what is so significant about that man? Do you know, GG, that this man has been selling secrets to other villages about Konaha and our forces? Said Naruto, quickly reaching out and grabbing the traitor's throat as he tried to escape, red eyes radiating killing intent. What happens to traitors, GG? They are executed, Naruto, said the Hokage, glaring at the traitor. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will show you a different power, said Naruto, raising his right hand. Placing it above the civilian's chest, it began to glow red. The traitor arched in pain as red energy began to seep out of his body and join with the energy around Naruto's hand. The council looked on in horror as the traitorous civilian began to age before their eyes, his hair growing out, changing from black to white before falling out, his skin wrinkling and rotting. All within a minute, Naruto turned away from the pile of dust that had been the traitor, holding a palm full of pulsing red energy. Let this be a lesson to you all, he said, holding the globe of crimson up in the air. What happens to the energy now? Asked Shikaku, his expression unchanged. A very good question. I could absorb it, increasing my chakra reserves with it. I could use the energy to fuel an attack, or I could. Naruto trailed off as he thought of something new. Could what? Asked Hiruzen. Naruto turned to the elderly Kage and smiled. I think I could make you young again. With those words, before anyone could react, Naruto charged the Hokage and buried the red orb in his chest. A flash of light blinded all the council members, many of them trying to shield their eyes. Only Aburame Shibi saw what transpired at the Hokage's seat, shielded from the light by the oval sunglasses he wore. When the light faded, the council members looked back to the Hokage's seat. Naruto had the arm of Sarutobi Hiruzen, helping him back into his seat. His hair had turned brown, as well as his beard. His wrinkles were gone and he appeared to be like he was when he had trained the Sannin. Hiruzen lifted a hand and stared at it, noting the change in skin color, musculature and absence of loose skin. Looking up at Naruto, he said, "How is this possible?" Naruto smiled, dusting his hands. Everything is possible. Naruto walked out of the council chamber, satisfied at the work he'd done. He tricked the council into believing that he used chakra-powered abilities, de-aged the Hokage, and denied Danzo's attempts to get him into NE, covert attempts, since everyone believed Ne was dead. A good night's work, don't you think, Kyuubi? Thought Naruto, forming a Kage bunshin as he walked. "Oh, yes, it is a good night when we get to put teams in their place," said Kyubi, growling as he stretched his neck, joints popping with little cracks. "We should return to the forest. We have more training to do." "I agree," said Naruto, beginning to pick up the pace as he turned a corner. Kyubi was confused at his choice of direction, as it went in the opposite direction of their forest home. Naruto? Where are you going?" asked Kyubi, looking at the blonde growing smaller as he ran away. "Ah, that's where he is going. Hyuga compound." Hinata opened the doors to the balcony, looking up at the sky, stars twinkling in the blackness above. Hinata took a deep breath, enjoying the fresh air of the night. She leaned on the railing, looking down at the garden below. "I wonder how Naruto is." Hand encircled her waist and pulled her backwards, colliding with her attacker's body. She spun quickly, preparing a Juken strike when she finally recognized her attacker. "Well, I was hoping for a kiss, Hinata-hime, not a Juken strike to the heart." "Maybe I should come back later," said Naruto, pulling down his cloth mask, displaying his fox-like grin. He acted as if he was to slink away, causing Hinata to roll her eyes at his antics. "Naruto-kun," said Hinata as she embraced him, kissing him passionately. Naruto smiled as they came up for air, grinning at his love. "See why I like this better?" Hinata punched him lightly in the chest. "What did I tell you about scaring me like that? That you enjoy it?" said Naruto, still grinning despite a second hit in the ribs. "She's been working harder," he thought as she added a little more power to the second blow. "I wanted to give you something," he said, reaching up one sleeve to reach a seal on his bicep. Hinata activated her Byakugan, trying to see what it was. Unfortunately, Naruto was always one step ahead, attaching seals that nullified the Byakugan's X-ray ability to every article of clothing he owned. "Here we are," he said, drawing a finished flute out of his sleeve, polished to a high shine. A flowering vine had been carved into it, stretching from one end to the other. He had finished it while shooting down Danzo's attempts. "I thought you might like it." Hinata picked up the flute and set it aside before pulling Naruto into her arms. Hinata looked up at Naruto, their faces an inch apart, before pulling him into another kiss. When that kiss ended, Naruto sat on one of the chairs on the balcony, twisting Hinata around to sit with him. "I believe it is safe to assume that you like it." Hinata just looked at him with her lavender eyes for a moment before looking back up at the sky. She sighed in pleasure as Naruto moved his hands, pressing sore muscles and bringing relief with every touch. "What did the council want, Naruto-kun?" "They wanted to know how I threw those shuriken without touching them." "Chakra strings are easily used in the same way." "I see," said Hinata, snuggling further into Naruto's chest. Naruto tilted his head to the left, his ears picking up a whistling sound, faintly metallic in nature. "Metal slicing air," thought Naruto, following the sound. A throwing dagger twirled through the air and buried itself into the chair, 3 inches from Naruto's shoulder. Naruto recognized the style of blade and pulled it out of the seat. A black, triple-bladed knife with a special slot in the handle made for either a blade trap for an unaware enemy or for a piece of paper for messenger purposes. Who would look for a message in a knife? "What is it, Naruto-kun?" asked Hinata, confused at the sudden appearance of a knife and the absence of emotions in Naruto. He pulled a slip of paper out of the handle and paused for a moment as he read it. Looking up, he smiled and, using a minor Kaiden jutsu, burnt it. "What is it?" reiterated Hinata. Naruto grinned wider. "An old friend, one who hates a certain aspect of Konaha as much as I do." Naruto's grin turned sour as he realized one thing he didn't think about before. If he was going to meet his old friend, he would have to leave now. "Unfortunately, I have to go, Hinata-hime," said Naruto, placing the dagger in his belt. Lifting Hinata to her feet, he claimed her lips for a final kiss and jumped onto the wall surrounding the compound. "Where are you going?" "Kyubi is going to love this," thought Naruto as he formulated a reply. "I am going to a brothel. I am in so much trouble," thought Naruto as he jumped away. Damn him to hell. The Black Wolf. The Black Wolf was one of the nicest bars in Konaha, though few people knew of its true purpose. It was off Takamiru Way on the west side, not far from the wall surrounding the village. It had a reputation for having some of the best wines in the city, a fact used most often as an excuse when a patron's wife asked awkward questions. It was Naruto's first visit, though he had heard of its reputation when he would accompany caravans through the desert of K's. One heard many interesting stories around a merchant's campfire. The brothel had 3 stories. The first, where food and wines were served, resembled a spacious inn. A sign denoted the second floor as the lounge, and the third as guest rooms. A few of the other patrons looked up at the sight of a man dressed in Suna-style clothes walking in, but they turned back to their drinks, meals, and pleasurable company as he directed a brief glare at them. "Hello, Shinzen-kun," a breathy voice said as he stopped a few feet inside the door. He turned and looked down slightly into the eyes of a woman, a few years older than him by his assumptions. She stood very close to him, close enough that the spicy scent of her perfume wafted over him. Lang if I'm not mistaken, thought Naruto as he smiled at the woman in front of him. Her voice was pitched low and inviting, as if Naruto and she were sharing secrets or soon could. Her dress was made entirely of white lace, covering her from her throat to ankles. If Kyuubi was here, he would note that the lace forming the dress was not in a tight pattern, allowing an observer to see some of her creamy flesh beneath the dress. Kyuubi would also note that the woman obviously wore nothing underneath it. "Excuse me?" he said, still smiling as charmingly as he could at the woman. "Is there any way I can help you? Would you like me to bring you a glass of sake and explain our range of services?" Her smile didn't waver as she noticed his eyes never left hers as many others have before him. "No, thank you," Naruto politely said. "Perhaps you'd prefer to come to the lounge and speak with me more privately," she said, raising a hand and running a finger along his jawline. "Actually, I'd prefer not to." "Thank you all the same," said Naruto, catching her hand in his and returning it to her side. She arched an eyebrow at him, as if he had suggested something devilish. "Normally I like a man to warm me up a little, but if you want to go straight to my room, I'd be." "No," Naruto said as her tempting smile slipped a bit. "I thank you for the offer, but I have no use of your services this night. I do, however, require your help." He handed her the note he had received via messenger knife. Her eyes lit up as she recognized the name at the bottom. "This way," she said, taking his hand and pulling him across the room. Opening a door at the back of the room, she pulled Naruto into the dark hallway. She pointed down the corridor, saying, "His office is that way." Naruto pulled a few Ryo notes from his pocket and pressed them into her hand. "Thank you." She smiled as she left. Not a fake smile, like the one she had displayed while trying to seduce him, but a true smile. "I am so lucky Kyuubi isn't here," thought Naruto as he walked down to the end of the hall. Opening the door, he smiled at the man behind the desk. "Hello, Sukapu. It has been too long." The man behind the desk smiled as he stood. He was dressed in black kung fu uniform-like clothes, silver edges flashing slightly in the light. There was a slight sound of cloth on cloth from the corner behind the door. Something moved towards Naruto behind his field of vision, prompting a response from the blonde. Naruto's response was an instinctive kick. His foot caught Sukapu's bodyguard in the chest. Though the guard was a big man, Naruto had chakra, the force, and perfect aim on his side. Naruto felt ribs crack beneath his foot. The guard flew backwards into the wall, slid down, and lay on the floor, unmoving. Naruto scanned the room, using all his senses to assure him, the guard, and Sukapu were the ones in the room. Sukapu has his hands up, fingers spread, showing he had no weapons. "He wasn't going to attack you. He was just making sure you didn't have weapons. I swear it." Sukapu looked at the man on the floor. "By Kami's blood, you've killed him." Scowling, Naruto looked at the man, sprawled unconscious in the corner. He knelt by him and placed fingers against the man's neck. Nothing. He spread his hands over the man's chest to feel if one of the broken ribs might have penetrated his heart. Then he slammed his fist down on the man's chest. And again. "What the hell are you?" Sukapu cut off as the man's chest suddenly rose. The bodyguard coughed and moaned. Naruto knew from experience that his injuries were agonizing. "But he'd live. Get someone to take care of him," growled Naruto. "A few of his ribs are broken." Eyes wide, Sukapu went out into the hall. Within a few minutes, Sukapu came back with a pair of bodyguards. Like the first, they were big, brawny, and looked like they might be able to use the swords at their sides. They merely glared at Naruto and picked up the big man between them. They carried him out of the room and Sukapu closed the door behind them. "You've obviously learned a thing or two, haven't you?" Sukapu said. I wasn't testing you. He insisted on being here. I didn't think, never mind. Naruto smirked. Next time, tell him what type of man is meeting you. Then, he'll ask himself if he could stop me if I wanted to kill you. Sukapu looked thoughtful as he processed the information and saw Naruto's point. The emotionless takedown of his bodyguard showed him that if Naruto was in a particularly bad mood, few would be able to survive. After a minute of silence, Naruto sighed and took a seat. What do you need of me, my friend? There is an organization within Konaha that needs uprooting, as it were. Do you know anything about the group called Nei? Naruto smiled. Danzo had been thinking about his personal Anbu units all through the meeting. He only knew a little about it as Danzo himself knew nothing about the basis of Nei. This allowed Danzo to be mind-walked by a Yamanaka and get away without a problem. I know of it. Why? I have my own special group of devoted individuals who, like me, have found the need to remove such blight on our city, said Sukapu, reaching into his desk drawer and pulling a sheaf of papers out. Passing them to Naruto, he continued. A few weeks ago, one of our members was killed in an ambush. Since then, we've been on the lookout for a potential new recruit. Naruto looked over the papers. Some were pictures, probable members of Nei. Others were maps with red circles at certain spots. Those probably were base locations. I've seen these people around in the marketplace. Yes. The Nei agents are very good at remaining undercover. They can act as we do or switch to the emotionless killing machines they are, said Sukapu, pouring himself a drink. Sake? He offered. No, thank you. Let me get straight to the point. We need a new member and I nominated you. The rest of the council agreed. Are you interested? Why did the council agree? Asked Naruto, curious at the ease he was agreed upon. I told them about the day you rescued me and the rest of the caravan. It was nothing, said Naruto, waving his hand dismissively. You eliminated 48 bandits and 5 ex-Suna nuke nen. You call that nothing? Asked Sukapu, humor evident on his face. There were only 5 nuke nens. They were a rank in the bingo book. The standards of the writers must have gone down. Nevertheless, are you in or out? Naruto pondered on the offer for a few moments, weighing the pros and cons of this decision. It will remove a thorn from Gigi's side. Sure, I'm in. Sukapu beamed and shook hands with his newest comrade. Welcome to the Niwishi. Naruto smiled as well. Now, if you don't mind, I have to go convince my girlfriend not to kill me because your idea of fun is to make your base of operations in a brothel. Oh? You have a girlfriend now? Who is she? Naruto merely drew on the force, cloaked himself and left through the open window behind Sukapu. Sukapu smiled. I knew he would join us. Back at the Hyuga compound, Hyuga Hinata was pacing back and forth on her balcony, awaiting her boyfriend's return. Why would he visit a brothel when he's got me? She thought to herself. Because an old friend is an idiot, said Naruto, shimmering into visibility before her. Honestly. What idiot would set up his cover in a brothel? You went to a brothel to meet an old friend? Asked Hinata, her brow furrowed in confusion. Naruto smiled. What type of boyfriend would I be if I went there for any other reason? Who is your old friend? Asked Hinata, beginning to understand. A man I saved in the dunes of K's, said Naruto. That's all I can tell you, for now, anyways. But, I said, not now. I will tell you later. Please understand, Hinata-hime. But Naruto, said Hinata, pouting at Naruto. Naruto smiled as he saw this. Hinata's ultimate technique. Later, Hinata-hime. The next day, Sasuke and Naruto arrived at Training Ground 7. Naruto summoned some clones to work on his chakra control via the water walking exercise. Some of them went as far as to lie down on the surface and radiate enough chakra to stay afloat. The original Naruto removed his sandy-colored cloak and stuck a senbon needle into the ground. Then he began balancing on one finger above it, switching hands after he finished 100 inverted, one-handed push-ups. Sasuke copied Naruto's mix of physical and chakra training, though he only managed 75 before he lost his concentration and slipped off the senbon. The tranquility of the scene was soon broken with a squeal of, Sasuke-kun. The pink-haired Kunoichi came running onto the scene, lugging a pack full of ninja tools. Dropping the aforementioned bag, she launched herself at Sasuke. Unfortunately for her, Sasuke quickly and flawlessly kawaramied with a tree branch above him, giving her a face full of leaves. Naruto smiled as Sasuke jumped down from the branch above, brushing some leaves off his clothing. Getting better with those kawaramis, Sasuke? Running from fangirls makes it a requirement, replied Sasuke, smiling as Sakura extricated herself from the tree branch. The pinkette was not to quit after just a tree branch. Sasuke-kun, want to go out sometime? She asked, smiling with hearts in her eyes at the Uchiha heir. No. This continued for 2 hours. Every 5 minutes, Sakura would ask Sasuke and he would reply. Naruto was contemplating hunting his wayward sensei when, in a whirlwind of leaves, he appeared atop one of the 3 training posts. "You're late," shouted Sakura in her banshee mode, causing Sasuke, Naruto and Kakashi to mess around with their ears for a second or two to clear the ringing from them. "I got lost on the road of life," said Kakashi, jumping down from the post. "Right, Kakashi-sensei," said Naruto, his fanged grin appearing on his face as he used the force to delve into Kakashi's most recent memories. "How's hubby-chan? Oh, you say something, Naruto?" asked Kakashi, trying to use his hip cool attitude technique that he usually does to guy and glare at Naruto at the same time. Sakura was in a near apoplectic state. First he's late, then he makes up this lame excuse, and then he fails at whatever technique he tried to use to avoid the question. Kakashi pulled an alarm clock from his belt pouch and placed it on one of the training posts. "In this exercise, you have 1 hour to get a bell from me." "What bell?" asked Sakura, confused. Naruto and Sasuke exchanged glances and rolled their eyes in unison. "These bells." Kakashi held up a pair of silver bells, making them ding off of each other. "Whoever doesn't have a bell when the alarm goes off, goes back to the academy to repeat a year." "But there's only 2 bells," shouted Sakura, using her amazing brainpower to state the obvious. "Correct," said Kakashi, hanging the bells on his belt. "Now come at me like you're going in for the kill," he said, looking down at the ground. He looked up and fixed them with a demonic glare. "If you don't, you'll never get the bells." Sakura nearly fainted, scared out of her wits. Sasuke and Naruto both reacted differently. Naruto pulled a pair of shuriken from his holster and pouch and flipped through seals. Sasuke did the same, though he pulled 12 shuriken from his pouch. As one, they called out their jutsu. Kaden. Buki Heni no Jutsu. A stream of fire poured out of their mouths and melted the weapons they held. The molten metal then formed a new weapon. Sasuke now held an Oni shuriken. Naruto held a wave-style shuriken with 4 holes where the blade of each point connected. See Nabari no O, Chapter 5, page 15 for a picture of the star. Once the flames receded from their weapons, both wound up and threw their new throwing weapons at Kakashi. As the 2 stars whirred closer, Kakashi's only thought was, what the hell? Now, I really wanted to end it here and give you guys a Cliffy, but I'm a nice guy. I think. So here's some more. Kakashi immediately dropped to the ground, avoiding the shuriken by millimeters. As he stood, he noticed the stars turned in mid-air, arcing back to their appropriate thrower. Shuriken has little effect on him, said Sasuke, folding the Oni shuriken with a flick of his wrist. The blade segments stacking on top of each other with an ominous clicking sound. Apparently, Naruto slipped a strand of ninja wire through the holes in the star and stowed it across his back. Not bad, Naruto, Sasuke, said Kakashi, dusting himself off from his brief meeting with the earth beneath his feet. You, on the other hand, he said, pointing at Sakura, need some work on withstanding killer intent. As Sakura tried to sputter out a comeback, Kakashi assumed a thinking pose. Now that I think about it, I didn't say, go. Naruto and Sasuke tensed, waiting for the command to unleash hell. Kakashi smiled at this, proud of his little friend. Go. The 3 soon-to-be full genin leapt away, cloaking their chakra and hiding themselves amongst the vegetation. Kakashi stood alone on the training ground, looking around at the now empty space. Closing his eyes, he took a moment to sense around for chakra sources. There's Sasuke, he thought. He's gotten really good at suppressing his chakra. I'll bet that Naruto's been helping out with his training. A second later, a second chakra source was located. Sakura. She is good as well, though it is probably due to her low chakra stores more than stealth training. Why did I get a team with a fangirl on it? Kakashi shook his head and looked around. He had sensed 2 of his 3 students. Where's Naruto? Kakashi felt a chill go down his back. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. A threat sense? From who? Scanning the area, he saw no one. None of his other senses were tingling, so he decided it was just a false alarm. A hand landed on his shoulder, startling him. He looked left and found himself looking into the blue eyes of his student. The problem with people these days is their senses are screaming at them and they don't listen to well, he said, smiling at his silver-haired teacher. A shit-eating grin stretched across his face. For instance, your aptly named threat sense signaled you of my approach, but when your other senses told you nothing, you ignored the most powerful of them all. Kakashi sighed, brushed Naruto's hand off his shoulder and shook his head. Not everyone is insanely good like you, Naruto. True, I heard from a very reliable source that you knew Kenjutsu. True? Naruto asked as he pulled his shikomizu from its sheath at his belt. Kakashi's eyes widened as he pulled a 3-foot blade from a 4-inch sheath. Yes, I do know Kenjutsu, said Kakashi, running through a set of hand seals before slamming his hand onto the ground. A poof of smoke quickly faded as Kakashi picked up an Enbu-style ninjutsu. Very nice, said Naruto, looking over the shining piece of blue steel in his teacher's hand. I'm gonna guess it's made of chakra-conducting metal? Very astute, Naruto. I wish I had a wind affinity so my blade would cut easier. Unfortunately, I have lightning, but it does have an extra effect if I get a hit on you. Naruto spun his sword through a pair of figure eights before settling his blade in a reverse grip. Mine is the same, though I do have a wind affinity. Ah, this will be interesting, said Kakashi, adopting a one-handed Kenjutsu stance. Sasuke smirked from within his leafy hiding place, 100 meters from the action. Kakashi-sensei is screwed, he just doesn't know it yet. Naruto flicked his sword left and right as he began charging, drawing Kakashi's gaze with the tip. A head-on attack? I know Naruto is smarter than that, thought Kakashi, leaning forward on the balls of his feet. Naruto accessed the force and dashed forward, a booming sound made by the displaced air as he swung the shikomizu at his sensei's torso. Kakashi's one uncovered eye widened as he barely had time to position his blade to intercept the blow. Naruto sped past, his blade skidding off Kakashi's. Kakashi felt the wind buffet him as his blonde student zoomed past, his eyes barely able to see him at all. Kakashi spun and assumed a guard stance, only to see Naruto shimmer and disappear. What the hell was that? Naruto grinned as Kakashi looked about, trying to locate him. Force concealment is such fun, he thought, forming a cross seal. 14 Narutos appeared, all using the force to remain hidden from their teacher's sight. They drew their shikomizu, grinning as Kakashi continued his search, unaware of the danger he was in. Nodding at them, the original dashed away, a pair of clones following him, booming sounds accompanying them as they used the force to launch themselves away. The other dozen formed a circle around their cycloptic teacher, settling into the stances of the 6 styles of single-bladed combat. All smiled as they began to whisper, "Let the bodies hit the floor." With Sasuke, hidden by the green foliage of the tree, Sasuke watched as Naruto disappeared from sight. He's really using those force powers of his. Great. Sasuke shook his head. Now, I gotta work harder to get to his level, he muttered to himself. What he wasn't expecting was a response. Not really. Sasuke spun around to see a trio of Narutos hanging from a branch by their feet, a familiar shit-eating grin across his features. Sasuke looked back down to see his teacher being swarmed by a dozen shadow clones, each wielding a blue-tinted blade with the faintest outline of chakra around it. Wind chakra? He looked back up to the Naruto trio. Which one is the real you? He asked, putting 2 fingers to his temple as he felt a headache coming on. The 2 outer Narutos pointed at the center one, while the indicated one pointed a thumb at himself. Why? They chorused, each cocking their heads to the side. Stop doing that. Stop what? Never mind. You got a plan? Sasuke asked, searching around in his pouch for the headache pills he was sure he had packed. Naruto decided to lend a hand, using the force to raise the bottle from the bottom of Sasuke's pouch. Thanks, said Sasuke, grabbing the bottle and proceeded to toss back a pair of pills. Swallowing the pills dry, he winced. Well? Naruto shrugged, gesturing the 2 clones over. Both looked over to Kakashi's battle with their brothers and poofied away. Back with Kakashi? What the hell did I sign on for? thought Kakashi as he flipped, whirled, ducked, and ultimately tried to dodge the blades of the supposed dead last of the academy. A pair of Narutos rolled to either side and swung at his ankles, attempting to slice Kakashi's Achilles tendons. Kakashi pulled a cartwheel to avoid the crippling blows, passing over the blades with hairs to spare, only to receive a kick in the back, sending him into a tree. Kakashi rolled off the tree, landing on his back with a ringing head. Sure, step back to Jonin. All I gotta do is teach a trio of kids. How hard can that be, huh? Can't be that hard, can it? No, gotta be a team Jonin, not an assassin. What the fuck did I sign up for? Kakashi looked up to see a circle of Narutos surrounding him, blue blades reflecting blinding light into his eyes. Parley? The circle laughed and raised their blades. Didn't think so. Kakashi launched himself off the ground, pawned a handful of shuriken and tossed them at the circle. The Narutos either dodged or deflected the shuriken, making Kakashi dodge his own throwing stars. Kakashi landed outside the circle, making the clones turn after him. One dashed forward and slashed at Kakashi's leg, moving too fast for Kakashi's eye to see it until the clone had completed the swing. A gash opened on Kakashi's thigh, causing the Jonin to wince and stumble. Other clones began raining blows on the Jonin, forcing him to one knee as the multitude of the slashes began to take their toll. The sound of displaced air filled Kakashi's ears as the Naruto mini-army dashed back and forth, slashing at any opening Kakashi left. Kakashi nearly wept when he heard the timer ring to signal the end of the exercise. Sakura came out of hiding to find her teacher covered in tiny gashes and cuts, surrounded by Narutos, blood dripping from his fingers from some deeper gashes on his left arm. Kakashi trembled as his body threatened to collapse, legs burning from sweat mixing in his wounds. Groaning, Kakashi dropped into a sitting position. He looked down and saw the pair of bells still at his waist. Maybe I'm not that bad after all. What did you do? Asked Sakura, her shrill voice causing all birds in a mile radius scatter and take flight. We won the test, no thanks to you, said the Naruto clones, sheathing their swords with sinister hisses. What do you mean, won? I still have the bells, panted Kakashi, looking up at the assembled clones. Two Narutos lifted a bell each, identical grins on their faces. Kakashi gaped at the clones before looking back down at the bells at his waist as they transformed back into Kage Bunshin. When? He asked. After he disappeared, nearly hitting you in the process. He used 2 Bunshin to Kawarimi the bells, said a clone as he pointed at the other. The clones dispelled, leaving 2 Naruto clones, their pink-haired teammate, and the bloody Kakashi. Looking around, Sakura asked, "Where's Sasuke-kun?" The second Naruto poofed, Sasuke undoing the henge of his teammate. Here, cue flying fangirl tackle attempt, thwarted by a well-timed crouch. Sakura hit the ground hard and slid a few feet from the inertia of her leap, causing the friends to share a quick grin. Kakashi began to chuckle before bursting into laughter. Me, brought low by a pair of genin. Ha! Naruto walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry, Kakashi. You underestimated us. Hopefully, you won't make the same mistake twice. Kakashi looked up at his student as a warm feeling spread from Naruto's hand. Naruto smiled and pointed down at Kakashi's arm. Kakashi looked down at his wounds and found them knitting themselves, healing without a scar fast enough to see. Impressive, thought Kakashi, flexing his arm, feeling as if he had just got out of bed rather than fought a dozen clones. I know. Kakashi started as he heard Naruto's voice echo through his mind. He looked up and caught a wink from Naruto. I'll explain later, said Naruto's voice. Nodding at Naruto, Kakashi stood and surveyed his team. An enigmatic blonde warrior with amazing powers and fighting styles. An Uchiha who shared fighting styles with said enigma and mounds of untouched potential. And a pink-haired fangirl who hung on the Uchiha's every word and does not focus on her training. Looking over at Sakura, who was picking herself off the ground, dirt smeared on her face and red dress, Kakashi sighed. The only one who needs work is the girl. Kakashi looked over to the blonde and black-haired ninja, who were now playing a game of extreme hot hands, meaning hot hands with blades. One question, said Kakashi, smiling beneath his mask. What was the point of this exercise? Teamwork, chorused Sasuke and Naruto, not even looking away from their game, Naruto carving a gash into Sasuke's hand with a lightning-fast slice. Sasuke flinched, looked at his hand to gauge the damage, and then stuck out his hand to continue the game. Sakura looked a mixture of confused at the answer and horrified at the potentially dangerous game her crush was partaking in. Seeing Naruto add a second cut to Sasuke's hand caused her to throw herself between them. "Stop hurting Sasuke-kun." Naruto looked down into her eyes, blue eyes flashing. "Did Sasuke ask for your help?" he asked, restraining the urge to send her flying, courtesy of a force push. "No," stuttered Sakura, suddenly feeling very afraid at the coldness in her teammate's eyes. "Then move and let us continue the game." Sakura immediately left the immediate area as Sasuke scowled at the pair of gashes on the back of his hand. Naruto smirked as Sasuke stuck his hand back out, ready to continue the game. "Ready to go on?" he asked, lifting his blade. "Just go," said Sasuke, preparing to dodge. Kakashi shook his head. "Sakura didn't get a bell, so she's going back to the academy," said Kakashi, looking over at Sakura, who began to cry at the mention of leaving her crush. Naruto pulled a third slash with one hand and tossed the bell he held at Sakura, making it bounce off her forehead. "We're a team. We pass or fail together. Besides, there are no three-man teams." "Self-sacrifice for your teammate?" asked Kakashi, inwardly smiling. "Well, I am impressed. Congratulations, you've just become genin. We start missions tomorrow. Be at Shozen Bridge at 7. "Hi, Shisho," chorused Sasuke and Naruto, bumping fists in celebration. They sheathed their knives, both sporting a few cuts that were rapidly healing, and began walking away. Sakura immediately trailed after them, asking Sasuke for a date. Sasuke and Naruto outran the pinkette, leaving her confused in the middle of the road as their after images faded. Ichiraku Ramen Bar. "So, score thus far. Naruto in the lead by 2 games, said Tucci, serving his best customers, smiling at the scowl the Uchiha heir shot him. Yeah, he's winning, so what? He's been practicing for a year to get that speed," growled Sasuke, digging into his ramen. "And I still hold back," remarked Naruto, finishing his 4th bowl. "Another, please." Sasuke dropped his head to the countertop with a clunk, his scowl deepening. "Thanks for that. Don't mention it." Tucci set another bowl in front of him, appealing scents filling Naruto's nose. As he reached for his chopsticks, he felt someone watching him. A quick look behind him sighted a figure in a brown hood, face hidden by its shadow, a cloak hiding one side of his body. A few knives were strapped to his side, hilts down, along with a short sword at his hip. The man knelt atop a building 300 meters from Ichiraku, staring at Naruto. "Sasuke, I gotta go," said Naruto, standing up. He tossed a few ryo down on the counter. "Next one is on you." Sasuke looked up in time to see Naruto vanish into thin air. Sighing, he turned back to his meal. There's always something with Naruto. The brown-cloaked man knelt at the edge of his building, watching the newest member to the Niwishi. "He doesn't look that impressive," thought the man as the blonde disappeared. "Appearances can be deceiving, Niwishi-san," said Naruto, settling onto one knee beside him. "Your stealth technique needs work." The Niwishi turned his head from the ramen stand and looked at Naruto, a sense of newfound respect rising within. "My apologies. Why are you here?" asked Naruto, looking the ninja over, appraising the weapons his ally carried. All were well crafted, sturdy, and looked as if they were well used. "A meeting has been called. All the Jushin will be there. That means you must attend," said the Niwishi, holding out a pair of knives. "What are these?" asked Naruto, holding the knives up to the light to examine them. Engravings on the blade immediately drew his gaze. "These markings, a map? Very good. Q said you were smart," said the man. "I am Roku. I'll see you tonight." As the newly introduced Roku began to leave, Naruto asked, "What is my number?" "Binbouji Jushin. Unlucky number 13, EH. "Sounds fun," said Kyubi, waking up from a long nap. "Lazy kitsune," thought Naruto, placing the dual blades into a loop on his belt. "Should we tell them that there are really Juyon? Nah, it's funner that way." That night, undisclosed location. The full moon cast shadows in the forest, branches and leaves thrown into contrast against the pale moon. An owl hooted and took flight, wings as silent as the footsteps of the 13 shadowy figures who stepped out of the trees, all walking to the center of the clearing. A stone with 26 slots sat in the center of the clearing, weather-beaten and worn. The 13 circled the stone and drew steel. "A pleasure to see you again, Jushan," said Roku, holding his blades loosely, casually, face hidden by his hood. "Glad you found the right place." "The pleasure is mine, Roku," said Naruto, his sandy-colored cloth wrapped around his face. "Enough," said a man 4 positions away from Roku. "We have a meeting to call to order." The assembled Jushan Niwishi placed their blades in the slots, activating hidden mechanisms beneath the stone. The stone dropped a few feet and moved underneath the rim of the hole. "Follow us, and do so without hesitation," said Roku, stepping forward. Crossing his arms, he jumped into the hole, hurtling out of sight. The rest of the Niwishi followed suit, dropping down into the subterranean cave. Hidden meeting place. Check. Cloak and dagger theme. Check. Now all we need is a guy to show and say, "There's a traitor among us," and we'll have a full set," said Kyuubi, filing his claws. Naruto dropped into the hole, landing on one knee with both hands up his sleeves, fingers resting above his saber seals. Plain stone walls surrounded the Niwishi, empty except for the wooden table and 13 chairs around it. Roku started clapping, smiling beneath his hood, the sound echoing off the walls. "Very theatric, Jushan. Very nice. Arigato, Roku," said Naruto, walking over to a chair at the end of the table. The others assembled around the table, each drawing their weapon of choice. Naruto was surprised when Roku did not pull out his short blade. Instead he pulled a punch dagger from under his half-cloak. The others drew short blades and katanas. There were other surprising weapons, needles, a pair of metal cestus and a blowtube among them. Naruto drew his lightsabers from his arm seals, idly spinning the handles between his fingers. As one, the Niwishi sat and placed their weapons on the table. The man at the head of the table spoke first. "Ne is on the move. The former Jushan was the casualty of our last battle, when he and 2 others stumbled onto a Ne base." "What is to be done, Ichi?" said one, his voice known to Naruto. "Sukapu. Hopefully, San, our newest acquisition will be able to tell us something." Roku leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "What acquisition are you talking about, Ichi?" Ichi reached beneath the table and pressed a release. With the grinding of mechanics, a table rose into view. Strapped onto it was a struggling man, trying in vain to break out of his bindings. "He was snooping around my house 3 nights ago. I got the drop on him and brought him here," said Ichi, gesturing to the man. "How do you know he's a Ne?" said a female voice at the end of the table. Naruto looked over at her, interested that there was at least one female member of the Niwishi. Her face was covered by a hood, like Roku, but she also included a mask like Kakashi. Only some of her violet hair and brown eyes were visible, eyes alight with curiosity. "I wonder if Kakashi knows his Kanojo is working for the Niwishi." Ichi tossed an object wrapped in a piece of cloth, landing in the center of the table with a thunk. She picked it up and removed the cloth, revealing an Anbu-style mask. Engraved in the forehead was the symbol for Ne. He was wearing that, Nana. If that doesn't prove it, he also has a tattoo on his tongue. "All Ne have that," said Ichi, gesturing to the mask. Naruto leaned forward at the mention of the tattoo. "That seal on his tongue prevents him from talking about Ne, correct?" "Yes. I've been thinking about finding a seal master who could try and counter it, though I am unsure of who to trust," said Ichi. Oh, pick me. What if I told you I knew a seal master, one who can be trusted to our cause," said Naruto, placing his elbows on the table, clasped hands in front of his face. "He could be here in seconds, if necessary." The Niwishi all turned and looked at him with incredulity in their eyes, particularly Nana and Ichi. "You have a seal master at your beck and call?" asked Nana, her voice incredulous. "Well, I do provide him room and protection. He does the same for me whenever necessary." "Nice cover." "Very well," said Ichi, settling back into his chair. "Summon this seal master. Hopefully we'll learn some more about Ne." Naruto stood and collected his saber hilts. "I'll be back in a moment," he said. With those words and a flourish of his cloak, he leapt out the hole in the ceiling. Once he was outside, he created a clone. Kyuubi took over and stretched his neck, cartilage popping. "Excellent. I finally get to torture someone," said Kyuubi, a fanged grin on his face. Naruto leapt down, landing on one knee as before. Nana handed Roku a sheaf of Ryo, muttering under her breath. "See, I told Nana you'd be back in a few seconds," said Roku, smiling beneath his cowl as he counted the ryo before tucking it beneath his half-cloak. "The Niwishi request, I deliver," said Naruto, gesturing behind him. Kyuubi landed on one knee and rolled forward, springing to his feet at Naruto's side. "Somebody call a seal master?" Once again, the Niwishi were incredulous. "This guy is a seal master?" asked Ichi. "He barely looks older than you. Nevertheless, he's the best. He's also older than he looks," said Naruto, throwing a sidelong glance at Kyuubi. Kyuubi merely smiled, yellow eyes amused. "Very well then," said Ichi, waving Kyuubi over. "Let's see what this seal master can do." Kyuubi walked over to the restrained Nei and shot him a glare loaded with killing intent. The Nei passed out. Kyuubi opened the Nei's mouth and took a look at the seal on his tongue. After a few minutes of silent contemplation, he looked back to the Niwishi. "Naruto, you called me for this? The counter seal for this, very simple. A few more minutes and you can try to get whatever you want concerning Nei out of this guy." Kyuubi turned back to his patient and proceeded to create the counter seal. After 2 minutes, Kyuubi stepped back. "It's done." Roku, Naruto and Nana stepped back as Ichi and the others crowded around the prisoner. Nana stepped closer to Naruto. How did he know that the prisoner is a Nei? Roku and Nana shared a glance. "What aren't you telling us?" asked Roku, slowly reaching for his sword. "I really don't want to kill all of you, so I would really like it if you would drop it," said Naruto, leaning forward to whisper it into their ears. "You will tell us," said Nana, her fingers itching towards hidden blades beneath her dark cloak. "You guys talking about me?" asked Kyuubi, throwing his arms around Roku and Nana. Both looked at him as if he was crazy. Kyuubi looked over his shoulder towards the rest of the Niwishi and dropped his voice to whisper to them. "If you continue to press the issue, the Niwishi had better start looking for a new Roku and Nana," he said, slipping knives from beneath his sleeves. "Thanks, Kyuubi, make the situation worse, why don't ya?" Kyuubi smiled, baring fangs for all to see. "That's my job." "Kyuubi," chorused Roku and Nana, looking from Naruto to Kyuubi and back. "You're the container of Kyuubi?" asked Roku, surprise evident in his voice. "Yeah, pretty much. Yan told us that we had a strong new member to replace Jushan. He didn't say he was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi," said Roku, staring at Naruto with a newfound respect. Nana looked confused. Well, as confused as someone with a full mask can be. "If you're the container, how is he out?" Kyuubi spoke up, making Nana and Roku flinch. "I possess a cage bunshin. Transform into my human form and then I can do whatever I want, within reason, since Blondie there won't let me go to a brothel." Naruto shook his head, tired of the long-standing argument. "Enough, Kyuubi." "Fine, for now," said Kyuubi. Removing the blades from Roku's and Nana's throats, he stepped back. "Since my work here is done, I shall be leaving. Good night, Niwishi." Kyuubi leapt out of the subterranean meeting room, leaving the Niwishi focused on their prisoner and Nana and Roku focused on Naruto. "So, anything else you're not telling us? I know who you are." Nana stepped back, fear flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean you know who I am?" Naruto smiled beneath his scarf. "I know who you both are," he said, looking both Roku and Nana in the eyes. "How?" asked Roku, crossing his arms. "How can you tell who we are when we don't know who each other are?" Naruto closed his eyes and squeezed the bridge of his nose, sighing with exasperation. "When your eyes can't help you solve the problem, rely on your other senses," he said. He looked up and stared both of them in the eyes. "I listened. Both of you helped me as a child. Isn't that right, Hubby-chan, Taka-san?" Both stepped back as Naruto said their Anbu codenames. Mitarashi Anko, Tokubetsu Jonin, former Anbu, codenamed Hubby, Kanojo of Hitaki Kakashi. Gekko Tatsumaki, Jonin, former Anbu, codenamed Taka, brother of Gekko Hayate, whispered Naruto, speaking only loud enough so that the others wouldn't hear. "Close? Holy shit," said Tatsumaki, amazed at Naruto's knowledge about him. "How do you know that?" "Being friends with the Sandame is a useful way to gain information, no?" asked Naruto, baring fangs as he grinned beneath his scarf. Tatsumaki whistled. "Nice." Just as Naruto was about to speak, Ichi and the rest assembled around the table. "Roku, Nana, Jushan, join us at the table, if you please." The three friends went to their seats, all staring at Ichi. Naruto leaned back in his chair, idly spinning a saber handle on his forefinger. "How goes the interrogation, Ichi?" asked Naruto, gesturing to the prisoner with his unoccupied hand. "Learn anything good? And by good I mean targets." "Yes, Jushan, we did find out a great deal from him, thanks to your seal master friend," said Ichi, leaning forward on his elbows, hands clasped in front of his face. "We have ascertained the location of 4 bases, names of 70 undercover NA operatives, and schedules of weapon shipments." Ichi fell silent, allowing the dozen other Niwishi to absorb the information. Naruto grinned as he ceased to spin his saber hilt and leaned forward on his elbows. "When do we strike?" The next day, Naruto walked down the street, whistling with his hands behind his head. "This is shaping out to be a great day. Ichi's given me a target to test me. I have friends among the Niwishi, and we're beginning missions today. What could be better?" Naruto turned the corner and saw Sasuke balancing a kunai on his finger, point down, as he waited for the rest of his team in the middle of the bridge. Sasuke looked up as Naruto approached, smiling as his brother-in-arms copied him, balancing a knife on his fingertip. "You're early, Naruto." "You're earlier, Sasuke. What's up with that? Hoping Kakashi-sensei would be on time if you showed up early?" Sasuke flicked his finger, launching the kunai at Naruto. Naruto waited till the last second, catching the knife between his fingers. After spinning it a few times, Naruto returned it, sending it back faster than Sasuke threw it. "That wasn't very nice, Sasuke. It's Hinata who throws pointy stuff at you, not me," said Naruto, laughing as Sasuke plucked the kunai out of the air barely an inch from his face. "It was to see if you were awake. I don't want to fail a mission because I have to save your worthless ass," said Sasuke, replacing his kunai in its holster. "Right," drawled Naruto, who was leaning up against the rail of the bridge, as he replaced his own knife with a flourish in a seal close to his kidney. "Where do those things go when you put them away? I never see any sheaths," said Sasuke. Naruto pulled back his cloak to show the seals across the back of his shirt. "Storage seals. Makes packing easier." "Ah." Naruto and Sasuke waited in silence, Naruto slipping into meditation, Sasuke falling asleep standing up. "Sasuke-kun," shouted Sakura, diving at her crush. Sasuke, still asleep, immediately took a step to the right, making Sakura fly right over the railing. Into the river? Sploosh! Naruto and Sasuke came out of meditation and sleep as Sakura plunged beneath the surface of the river. "What was that?" asked Sasuke, looking over his shoulder down at the water, the surface rippling, reflecting water in his eyes. "Someone suffering from rabid fangirl tendencies, probably." Both looked at each other. "Sakura," they chorused. 2 hours later, Kakashi shined to appear atop the Shinto gate by the bridge. He smiled as he surveyed the scene. Naruto was leaning against one railing, deep in meditation. "He's always doing that?" Sasuke appeared to be sleeping, leaning against the other railing. "Great, he's following Naruto's example. I'm screwed." Sakura lay in the middle of the bridge, looking as if she had just climbed out of the river. She appeared to be trying to dry off by sunlight. He leapt down and tapped Naruto on the shoulder. Naruto blinked as his eyes adjusted to the light after being closed for so long and asked, "What's up, Kakashi-sensei?" Kakashi jerked his head at the half-drowned looking Kunoichi. "What happened to her?" Sasuke avoided a fangirl tackle and she landed in the river, Naruto deadpanned. Said Kakashi, adopting a thinking pose. "Sakura, work on your element of surprise." "Sasuke, good job." Sakura weakly let out a, "You're late," going for screeching but failing. Sasuke shook himself awake and nodded at Kakashi. "Morning, Kakashi-sensei. Time to head for missions?" Kakashi nodded as he walked away from them, gesturing for them to form up behind him. "Yes, missions start today. Missions are given out in the tower. Let's hurry or we'll be late." Naruto and Sasuke shared a look as if to say hypocrite as they formed up behind Kakashi, Sakura following close behind, opening her mouth to ask Sasuke for a date. No. Konaha forest. Naruto crept through the foliage, silent as the grave. He was using the force for multiple functions, eliminating sound from his footsteps, if any, moving leaves and sticks from his path, masking his scent, and sensing for the target. The combined might of the force and his natural talent for stealth made him as untraceable as a wraith's shadow. He breathed deep, inhaling the lush smell of the forest around him. Feeling the dirt beneath his boots, the bark's roughness beneath his hand, and the light filtering down from the canopy. All was automatically processed in Naruto's mind as he stalked his prey. The target stopped, yellow eyes flitting back and forth, searching for any sign of enemies. Naruto smiled underneath his mask, fangs bared. She'll never know what hit her, he thought, breathing accelerating as he tensed for a sprain. 1/4 of a second for the leap, another for the takedown, and a fifth for tying her up, thought Naruto, readying the rope for his attack. Blue, in position, he whispered, speaking through the mic strapped to his throat. Black, ready. Green, almost in position. What's the hold up, Green? Hissed Naruto, watching the target sit at the stream running through the clearing, pausing to take a drink from the crystal waters. My hair is caught in a bush, whined the kunoichi of the team. Sasuke-kun, could you help me? Naruto, Sasuke, and Kakashi all sighed collectively, causing Naruto to flinch at the feedback through the earpiece of the radio. Black, moving to support Green, sighed Sasuke, leaving his post across from Naruto to aid Sakura. Naruto turned the dial on his radio, isolating the frequency on his radio so only Sasuke would hear him. One day, she's gonna get herself or us killed. No kidding. Blue, take the target on my signal, said Kakashi, rubbing his temples a mile away from the target. Hinata, should have tried for Hinata. Hell, even Ino would have been better. Why the fuck did I just take Sakura? Kakashi thought, wishing he rewind time to somehow circumvent the problem at hand. Naruto tensed once again, his eyes twinkling with excitement. He tensed and waited. Go go go. Naruto shot out of the bushes, landing not 2 feet from the target. A quick spin took her off her feet, flying backward in the air. As she neared the apex of her fall, Naruto wrapped his rope around her arms and legs, tying a quick but secure knot. Setting the target down, Naruto smiled and activated his radio. Target captured. Identity confirmed. Index. Back at the Hokage Tower. Tora! Cried Madame Shijimi, crushing the poor cat into her chest. I'm so glad these brave shinobi got you back to me safe and sound. Naruto inclined his head towards Kakashi. These missions really suck. Kakashi smiled beneath his mask. I know. Naruto looked back to the loving reunion playing out before him. Just a little harder, squeeze her a little harder. That night, a shadow sped through the trees, invisible against the dark sky of the new moon. Like darkness personified, the masked ninja expertly made his way through the forest. Coming to a stop in the fork of a tree, the shadow stopped, surveying the place before him. The entrance to an underground compound lay before him, ninja in dark clothes and white nei masks patrolling around in a pattern made to prevent any blind spots. Double guards. 3 patrol rings, tougher patterns for each ring. Danzo, you son of a bitch, you trained them to be emotionless, not caring if they lose comrades or not. The masked shadow drew a pair of cylinders, holding them open ends down in a reverse grip. Crossing his fingers, he created 2 clones. Naruto smiled beneath his mask, eyes changing from his normal blue to the crimson that only happened when he drew on Kyuubi's power. A tinge of red coated him, not enough to be seen in the darkness, but enough to be seen by Naruto, whose eyes were able to see light in the darkest of nights, thanks to Kyuubi's modifications. Nei has infested the garden, said Naruto, looking his clones in the eye. It's time the Niwishi cleaned up. Blades ignited with a sinister hiss, unleashing black blades that gave off no light. The trio leapt from the tree, blades thrumming through the air, death following silently behind. The outermost ring of Nei Anbu Real never knew what hit them. Wraith-like shadows loomed behind the Nei Anbu an instant before blades separated limbs and heads from their owners' bodies. The other 2 rings did not fare much better. The middle ring was annihilated, saber blades spinning, stabbing and hacking limbs off. One of them actually raised a blade to defend himself, but his steel was useless against a lightsaber. How does one defend his or herself from invisible attackers? A master of the force would have sensed the attack before the attacker had even formed the thought. Unfortunately for the Nei Anbu, they don't have the force. The final ring the original took out alone. When it's the last fight of the night, one must use his best tricks to keep them sharp and useful. Naruto's first attack cut one Nei in half. He followed through on the attack, spinning around to the knee's partner, now unshielded by his partner. Naruto launched a titanic force push, sending the white-masked Nei flying into a tree. Head first, at approximately 650 meters a second. Needless to say, the Nei was history. Naruto smiled as the Nei was pushed to his doom before circling around for his next target. A short Nei was next in line. Naruto reached out of the shadows and caught the Nei by the head. Lifting her off the ground, he invoked his favorite use of the force. Lightning crackled from Naruto's palm directly into the Nei's head, eliciting a shriek muffled by her mask. The Nei slumped, supported by Naruto's grip. A force-enhanced kick sent her corpse away, drawing attention to where it fell. The last three were Naruto's favorite. 2 slices neatly bisected the Nei agents. After the second cut, Naruto spun on his heel and performed a backhand upward slash. His blade whistled through the air, 2 feet from the third Nei. An ineffective move for anyone but a force user. As the slash was completed, a force push flowed out of it and turned the Nei into a cannonball, sending him into the trees. Naruto straightened and deactivated his blades. Looking around, he nodded to himself at the carnage he had partaken in, steam rising from the scorched body parts. 52 down. Naruto paused, sensing with the force. He smiled. 182 to go. With that, he entered the underground base, putting his sabers away and retrieving a scroll with a very powerful explosive seal written in it. After the stairs, 4 tunnels stretched out into the darkness before him. Where to put this thing? Kyuubi, any ideas? Eeny, meeny, miny, hey, mo. That's what I thought Naruto as he headed down the tunnel Kyuubi had used his scientific method to choose. Naruto smiled as he was forced to leap onto the ceiling to avoid a pair of Nei. Supporting himself with his legs, braced against the wall in the splits, he drew a pair of whisper knives from their seals on the back of his cloak. Sabers would give them too much of a warning, since they were underground, therefore the humming could not be mistaken for bugs. Death from above, thought Naruto as he dropped to the floor. As he fell, he buried the knives in the Nei's heads with a thunk, using their bodies to slow his descent. Naruto crouched between the newly made corpses, straining to hear any hint of an alarm or other such signal. Finding none, he withdrew his knives from the skulls of the Nei with a faint half-sucking, half-squelching sound. Replacing his blades, he crept deeper into the Nei nest. Fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the blood of a Nei? Damn it, that doesn't rhyme. 2 hours later, Naruto walked out of the base, having successfully planted the bomb without alerting the entire base to his actions. Okay, let's see. Infiltrate base, check. Plant big-ass explosive seal with the explosive power of 420 regular explosive tags, check. Watch the ensuing fireworks and chaos, in progress. Naruto paused in mid-step. I believe I have forgotten something, for the life of me I can't remember what it is. Naruto looked down at his wrist to the stopwatch he had timed to tell him when the bomb was going to explode. 5, 4, 3? Oh. Get to a safe distance, that's what I forgot, shit. Naruto realized this at the exact moment when the world erupted into flames. 400 meters away. I really love the force, thought Naruto as he crouched by a tree, watching the former base send flaming debris into the sky. Not to self. Get out of ground zero before the bomb explodes. Naruto stood and dusted himself off. Now, to head back to the forest for some sleep. 2 weeks later. I really hate this cat, said Naruto, carrying Tora in a sack reinforced with leather. Previous experiences had taught him that the cat had very sharp claws. Better to not take chances. How many times have we rescued that cat? Asked Sasuke, also hating these missions with a passion, shooting a glare at the wriggling bag. 12th time this week, chimed in Kakashi, falling into step beside them. But, look on the bright side. That's 15 D-class missions. We have enough for a C-class. Sasuke and Naruto grinned. Finally, a chance to use some destructive techniques, they both thought. Let's go, said Naruto, blurring out of existence. Kakashi and Sasuke followed suit, disappearing as well. Sakura hung her head. I really need to train harder till I can do that. Hokage Tower. Having safely returned Tora to her owner, Naruto, Sasuke, and Kakashi leaned against the back wall, waiting for Sakura to show up. Naruto pulled out a scroll and began to read, making notes in the margins as he read. Interesting, the trigger is fear, I wonder. Sasuke sidled over and tried to read the scroll over his shoulder, attempting to be discreet. Naruto immediately closed the scroll before Sasuke could manage a word. At Sasuke's look he spoke up. Sasuke, I'll explain later, he said, stowing the scroll in a loop at his belt. Sasuke scowled at Naruto but sidestepped back to his original position. Kakashi looked at his watch and began counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and enter Sakura. The door slid open, letting the panting Sakura slump into the room. The Sandaime looked up from his paperwork. Smiling, he said, now that the team is assembled, we can continue with your next assignment. Other D-class missions are grocery shopping for the council, babysitting the academy students, painting the Inuzuka kennels. Naruto held up a hand and spoke up. GG, my team and I humbly request a C-class mission. We have the required amount of D-classes done. Hiruzen began to reply when the door opened, letting Kurenai and her team into the mission room. Kiba and Akamaru were talking to each other, both barking. Naruto ascertained, with some help from Kyuubi, that Akamaru was trying to trick Kiba into giving him a bone. Kiba, unfortunately, knew better. Shino was still stoic as ever, surveying the room behind his tinted lenses. As usual, he was standing at the back of the group, hands in his pockets. Probably conversing with his Kakaichu, thought Naruto. Hinata smiled as she walked in, only to grin wider at the sight of Naruto and Sasuke. Hinata mouthed, I love you, at Naruto as she walked over to the Hokage with her team. Naruto watched her walk, blue hair bouncing with each step. She must have been working on her Jukin, thought Naruto as she seemed to float rather than walk gracefully with her teammates. That Jukin really makes your body movements refined and graceful. Hokage-sama, my team is requesting a C-class mission. We have accumulated the required number of D-class missions, said Kurenai, gesturing to her team as she spoke. Hiruzen smiled. What a coincidence, isn't it? Kakashi and his team have just applied for one as well, he said, gesturing to Team 7, who now assembled in a line a few meters from the desk. Unfortunately, Konaha has only one C-class mission in its books as of this morning. Things are usually slow in this season. More assassinations than escort missions these days. Kakashi and Kurenai will have to figure out a way to choose who gets it. Hey, Sasuke, whispered Naruto, tilting his head towards his friend. 50 says it's Jan-Ken-Pon. You're on. Kakashi and Kurenai glared at each other good naturally and prepared for one of the most challenging battles that could happen between two people. Jan-Ken-Pon, they shouted, each throwing out a hand. Naruto smiled as Sasuke's jaw dropped. Pick your jaw off the floor and pay up, Uchiha. Sasuke handed over the bills as Kakashi held up his hand. Scissors beats paper, Kurenai. Looks like I win, drawled Kakashi, smiling beneath his mask. Fine, growled Kurenai, turning back to the Sandaime. Team 8 requests a D-class mission. The Sandaime handed her a scroll and she and her team left. Well, now that has been settled, now I can brief you on your mission. You're to escort an herbalist, his family and his supplies to Kusa, explained Hiruzen, smoking his pipe. Team 7 will provide protection for the duration of the trip. Any questions? No, Hokage-sama, GG, said Team 8 and Naruto. Very good. Yakuso? Please come in, called the Hokage, looking to the side door. It slid open, revealing a man dressed in green, his hair a mix of grayish silver that hung over one shoulder in a long braid. His eyes were a deep green, revealing the gaze of a man who has seen much. Perhaps too much, thought Naruto, placing his scroll into a seal and settling into a relaxed stance. Konnichiwa, Konaha nin. Arigato for your assistance in this matter, said Yakuso, putting his hands to his sides and bowing at the waist. Naruto and Sasuke immediately bent into their own bows, though they never bowed their heads too much. It was an unspoken rule for shinobi to never take their eyes off an opponent. I recognize that voice, thought Naruto, remembering the Niwishi meeting. So this is the unmasked form of Ni? Great, he doesn't need any help on anything lower than an A- class. Naruto, Sasuke and Yakuso straightened from their bows, turned towards the door, and left. Naruto placed a hand on Yakuso's shoulder, stopping him in the hallway out of the tower. Niwishi, codenamed Jushan, mouthed Naruto, smiling at him. Niwishi, codenamed Ni. I really have a bad feeling about this. Yakuso smiled as he and Naruto walked out of the tower into the light. Yakuso tapped a quick message onto Naruto's shoulder. Many enemies, beware. Shit, thought Naruto. This does not bode well. Naruto walked alongside the wagon carrying Yakuso's supplies, smiling as he juggled a handful of knives, unnerving Yakuso's wife and daughter. Don't worry, said Kakashi, startling the pair as he appeared silently beside them, his nose in his book. Our blonde companion is very good at what he does. Naruto let one of the blades slip from his hand before catching it an inch from his face, eliciting a gasp from the mother and daughter. He smiled as he looked their way, giving them a playful wink. What does he do? Asked the young girl, looking up at the silver-haired ninja with innocent blue eyes. Everything and nothing, called Naruto, having heard their conversation. Mother and daughter shared a look of confusion as Kakashi slowed his pace to walk next to the wagon and Naruto added another couple of knives to the other airborne ones. Yakuso walked up from behind the wagon, bumping into Naruto slightly as he went to join his family. Naruto stumbled but never let a blade fall from his hands, lest he harm one of the civilians he was charged with guarding. Naruto replaced his knives after a final flourish, throwing all the knives into the air and catching them by spinning in a complete circle to catch the deadly rain of blades. He smiled at the amazement apparent on Yakuso's family's faces as well as Sakura's as he reached into his pocket for the message Yakuso had placed there when he collided with him. The Niwishi wish for me to assassinate a Kusa nin who is allied with the Ne. He supplies them with the weapons, armor and poisons Danzo can't gather at Konaha. He will have a large Ne force guarding him and his home, so I am glad you are here to help. It could be rather difficult. Naruto smiled as he touched the small seal at the bottom and released a sheaf of papers into his hands. Blueprints, patrol patterns, shift changes, everything they needed for a successful assassination. Hell yeah, time to kill some motherfucking Ne, shouted Kyuubi, pausing halfway through his Makashi pattern to shout his feelings to Naruto through their mind link. Naruto smiled, agreeing with his inner demon's assessment. It has been a while since we've bloodied blades, hasn't it? Kyuubi's roar of agreement echoing through his head. Yakuso's daughter wandered over to where Naruto was, looking at him curiously as he spun a knife through his fingers. How do you do that? Magic, replied Naruto, crouching to her height. What is your name, young one? Aki. Want to see another magic trick? Asked Naruto, putting his knife in the seal on the inner side of his cloak. Aki nodded vigorously, smiling at her new best friend. Naruto raised his hands, waved his fingers and rose to his feet. Aki stared at him, waiting for something to happen. Aren't you gonna do a trick? Naruto just pointed down, raising an eyebrow. Aki followed his finger, staring down at her feet, which were 2 feet off the ground. Wow! Shouted Aki, amazed how she was floating in midair. See? Magic, said Naruto, waving his fingers again, lowering Aki back to the ground. Now, go back to your Kasen and Tucson. I have to be on guard. Okay, bye, said Aki cheerfully, skipping back to her father's side to tell him about her flying experience. Naruto resumed his juggling act, smiling as he listened to his new friend's story. He closed his eyes and focused on throwing his knives. What everyone didn't know was that he was using the force to scan the surrounding area, constantly on the lookout for enemies. Whether they were shinobi or common bandits made little difference to him. The horses pulling the cart snorted as Naruto's senses brushed their minds, though Naruto quickly calmed them, just in case they were to get spooked. Oh, look, is that a bandit? 4 hours later, they reached the gates without any problems. Due to Naruto's senses, he was able to pick off the random bandit before he was even able to attack. As soon as he felt the intent of the bandit, one of his knives would, magically, disappear, having been thrown at a speed that even Kakashi could not see. Invisible to both eye and ear, the knives flew directly to the heads of the bandits, ending their approach. This occurred a few times over the hours, reducing Naruto's knife count by about a dozen. It was nearing evening when the convoy reached the walls of Kusagakure. The gates of Kusa were impressive. It was almost the same as the gates of Konaha, though they were half as tall. The walls were also half the size. Despite its size, the walls impressed Naruto and his group because of the camouflage. The walls were either painted or carved to resemble the grass and bamboo forests that stretched around it. If one were to look on from a distance, all he would see is rolling grassland and bamboo forest. Naruto whistled, effectively stating everyone's opinion about the city. As they approached the gates, 2 guards stood up, surprising a few of the group. Both wore ghillie suits, allowing them to blend right into the environment. Their masks, armor and even their weapons were covered in camo netting. Naruto had smelled them a mile away. Ghillie suits can become very hot after a while, which makes the wearer perspire. The smell of sweat was one of several scents Naruto used to track enemies. Sasuke had done some research before leaving Konaha and were prepared for such a greeting, surprising as it was to see it with his own eyes. Kakashi had been to Kusa before, during his time as a student under Namikaze Minato. He knew how they hid. Being enemies had taught him about their combat and stealth techniques very quickly. Being here after all these years brought back both good and bad memories. Yakuso pretended to flinch in surprise, though Naruto was sure he was merely keeping the facade up. Though, due to the close proximity of his family, Naruto noticed Yakuso's hand come close to his pocket. Naruto was relatively certain that Niwishi's blowtube was hidden in that pocket. "Halt!" called one of the guards, holding his left hand up while his right was on the handle of his camouflaged ninjutsu. "State your business." Kakashi walked ahead of the group, holding a letter in hand. "Team 7 of Konaha, escorting herbalist Doku Yakuso and his family," he said, offering the letter to the man. The guard who spoke stepped forward and accepted the letter from Kakashi as the second guard came up behind his partner. Probably standard procedure when dealing with foreign shinobi, thought Naruto as the guard handed the letter back. "Welcome to Kusagakure. Shinobi, please report to the cage's office to be debriefed. Also, be aware that one of our thorn units will be watching you." "Merely a precaution," said the guard. With his greeting finished, the guard turned back and resumed his position, blending almost seamlessly with the environment. Naruto and his teammates walked down the main road, heading for the cage's office. A tower would negate the camouflage of the city, so the cage had set up his office on the second story of a large building in the center of the village. Yakuso and his family had to branch off to go to their new home. Before they left, Naruto and his team shook hands with Yakuso, wishing him luck on his future endeavors. Yakuso and Naruto shared a grin as they parted. "We don't need luck, we just need the enemy to be stupid." Kusakuge's office. The Kusakage sat behind his desk, looking over the endless flood of paperwork that comes with being a cage. He sighed, wishing he had the chance to go on missions again. He started at the sound of a knock at his door. "Come in," he called. "Kusakage-sama, a group of Konaha nin to see you," his secretary said, sticking her head into the room. "Thank you, Hikari. Please, send them in," said the cage, leaning back in his chair. "No need," said Naruto, leaning against the back of the chair. Sasuke, Kakashi and Sakura leaning against the wall behind him. The Kusakage nearly leapt out of his chair. "I never heard him enter. What is he?" "Welcome, Konaha nin," said the Kusakage. "How do you find Kusagakure?" "Hard to see," said Sasuke, smiling. "Your ninja are well trained in blending in." "I second that comment," said Sakura, trying to impress Sasuke, again. "We know, Sakura," said Kakashi as he pulled his Icha Paradise out of his pouch and began to read. "Very nice," said Naruto. "It truly is the village hidden in the grass. Thank you. Your compliments give me feelings of pride and joy. I must insist you stay the night, seeing it is getting rather late and we have had a slight problem with bandits in the surrounding area. Probably not a threat to one such as yourselves, but I would rather send you back to the Hokage alive than have to send you in body bags. Only for your safety, of course." Team 7 exchanged glances. Well, the ones who heard the underlying threat did. Sakura was clueless as usual. Naruto smiled. "With your leave, Kusakage-sama, I would like to enjoy the sights of your magnificent city," he said, bowing low from the waist. "Please, do as you wish," said the cage, a charitable smile on his face. Naruto and Sasuke immediately left, leaping out the window behind the cage, closely followed by Kakashi and Sakura. Naruto turned to his friends. "Find an inn and get us a few rooms. I gonna go check on Yakuso and his family." "Sure, Naruto," said Sasuke, turning on his heel and heading down the street, on the lookout for an inn that was relatively safe. "We're in enemy territory now," thought Sasuke, watching a duo of white masked men following them by rooftop. "We'll have to be careful, even though Konaha is allied with Kusa." With Naruto, Naruto watched Sasuke lead Kakashi and Sakura down the main street. They'll be fine, he thought, smiling as the camouflaged thorn units followed his teammates. A quick sniff around saw him walking down a side street, following the scent of Yakusu's poisons. He smiled as he walked over the threshold of Yakusu's new store, watching his friends putting flowers and herbs on shelves. "Konnichiwa, Doku family," said Naruto, startling the wife and daughter. Yakuso smiled at his friend, having heard him come in. "He's got ears like a kitsune, that one." "Untrue. We've got ears like a kitsune. He's just got good ears," said Kyuubi, studying a scroll within Naruto's mindscape, writing notes on another. "Ha ha, what are you working on?" "Nothing," replied Kyuubi, innocently rolling his note scroll and slipping it beneath his robe. "Naruto, to what do we owe this pleasure?" asked Yakuso, brushing dirt off his hands as he walked over to shake hands with his guard, ally. Shaking hands with Naruto, Yakuso tapped a message on Naruto's wrist. "You will accompany me?" Naruto nodded, almost imperceptibly, earning himself a hidden smile. "Naruto-kun," shouted Aki, jumping into Naruto's arms and giving him a hug. "Hello, Aki-chan," said Naruto, smiling at his little friend as he swung her in a quick circle. Putting her down, Naruto turned back to Yakuso. "I just came by to see if you were getting settled in. Things are looking well around here." "Thank you, Naruto-san," said Yakuso, inclining his head in thanks. "Shall we see you again? We are staying the night in Kusa, under the watch of the cage. We leave in the morning." Yakuso nodded in understanding. "Then, I guess this is goodbye? I will see you again, my friend," said Naruto, shaking Yakuso's hand before he left. "I will meet you by the gates at midnight," tapped Naruto, staring Yakuso in the eye, channeling a small amount of Kyuubi's chakra to make his eyes flash red. Yakuso nodded as he released his friend's hand and turned back to his work. 20 minutes later, Naruto knocked on a door, sending his friends beyond the wooden barrier. He smiled as he listened to Sasuke rise and approach the door, drawing a kunai as he went. "Who's there?" asked Sasuke through the door. Naruto imagined him leaning against the door jamb, kunai ready to plunge through the door at the first sign of an enemy. "The Kokushu Warifusaka," said Naruto, wishing his friend could smell as well as he did. It would save time. "It's Naruto," called Sasuke, opening the door. "What took you so long?" "I was gone for half an hour." "Hardly a long period of time," stated Naruto as he entered the room and doffed his cloak. He placed it on the couch, looking about the room. Kakashi reclined on the floor, his head in one hand and his book in the other, silently reading. Looking up, he nodded at Naruto. "Any problems?" "None," replied Naruto, leaning against the wall. As he looked around, he noticed that his pink-haired teammate was not in the room. "Where's Sakura?" Sasuke came up behind him and answered. "She's in the shower. Said she wanted to get the dirt of the road off." Naruto nodded once before heading for a corner. He sat down, leaned back and promptly fell asleep. 4 minutes to midnight, everything was shrouded in darkness. Shadows within shadows, like all the light in the world had been covered or extinguished. To one who could not see in the dark, or to one who depended on their sight, it would have been their worst nightmare. The shadowed form of the sleeping Naruto opened his eyes, blue-eyed slitted pupils dilating as to allow him to see in the dark, like a giant cat or other nocturnal predator. A quick look at the clock ascertained what Naruto already knew. In less than 4 minutes, Yakuso in his Niwishi gear would arrive at the gates of Kusa. From there, he and Naruto would journey to the other side of the village and assassinate Baikokudo Tadokuro, the Kusa weapons merchant that was a major supplier of Nei. His death would eliminate one of the sources of supplies for Nei. Not enough to eliminate Nei's hold on Konaha, but enough to make the blow sting. "Danzo's going to be pissed as hell," thought Naruto rising from his seat. He left his cloak on the couch, as its coloring would stand out against the night. "This mission won't be a smash and grab," thought Naruto, checking over his knives and saber hilts. "I know, I only wish we had some time to kill all the Nei in the place," said Kyuubi, readying his own collection of knives. Opening the window, Naruto leapt from the ledge, journeying into the night. Sasuke looked up as Naruto leapt out the window beneath him. He had been practicing his meditation, trusting his ears to alert him if any Kusa assassins approached. "Naruto usually knows where I am. Why didn't he know I was there?" Sasuke thought, perplexed. Maybe his mediation had something to do with it. He had cleared his mind, letting all his senses go silent, almost. Now I gotta follow the baka, make sure he doesn't do something stupid, grumbled Sasuke, leaping off the roof in a graceful double flip to follow his blonde teammate. Gates of Kusa, midnight. The legendary Ni walked through the streets, cloak flapping slightly around his ankles as he approached the gate. His right hand held a ninjutsu loosely, lethally glinting slightly in the moonlight. His left hand held his blowtube, his weapon of choice. Jushan had talked with Nana, who told him stories of the deadly Ni, the second member of Niwishi. His poisons and darts killed hundreds of Ne units and left many paralyzed, or worse. As he walked to the gates, a hand shot out of the shadows, caught him around the throat, and dragged him into the shadows. Ni reacted instinctively, grabbing the hand and spinning around, putting his attacker into an armbar. His free hand brought his knife to the man's throat. When you try to attack a man, make sure you know something about getting out of this type of situations, whispered Ni, pressing the blade against the man's throat. Jushan spoke up from behind him, leaning against the shadowed wall, smiling beneath his mask. And you should be more aware, Ni, since the man you're holding is a cage bunshin. To emphasize Juzen's point, his clone vanished with a muted poof and a puff of smoke. Ni looked over to see his friend's eyes twinkling with suppressed mirth. Not bad, Jushan. I have my moments, said Naruto, shrugging in an innocent-like manner. That you do? Have you reviewed the documents? Yep, said Naruto, tapping the side of his head. Damn near photographic memory. Good. We'll approach from the east side, slip past the guards, enter Tadakuro's room, slit his throat and leave before anyone knows we're there. Good plan, bold, simple, fucking impossible, let's go. Go where? Asked Sasuke, coming around the corner to stand with the shadowed forms of Jushan and Ni. Ni immediately put Sasuke into a headlock, a blade at his throat and a forearm across his windpipe. Jushan, you know him? My teammate, Uchiha Sasuke. Is he a threat to the cause? Ni asked, tightening his grip slightly, causing Sasuke to struggle as his airway was closed. No, said Jushan, pulling Ni's arm so that Sasuke could breathe, causing to flop to his knees gasping for air. What do we do with him? Naruto thought for a moment. We'll take him with us. Ni looked at him as if he were insane. Are you insane? He's going to get us caught if he comes with us. He's an Uchiha. A little stress would be good for him, if you know what I mean, said Jushan, throwing a pointed look at Ni. Ni looked confused for a moment before looking at Jushan with realization on his face. Would that work? Yeah, I think it would, said Jushan, pulling Sasuke to his feet. Naruto, choked out Sasuke, still holding his throat. Not now. You're coming with us. We have to kill a man named Tadokuro. His death will hinder the organization trying to undermine Konaha. You will follow our commands to the letter. Understood? Sasuke looked up at the masked faces of Ni and Jushan and noted the glint in their eyes. I have to help them. Understood. Good. Let's go, said Ni, striding off down the street, cloak swirling sinisterly around his ankles as he walked. Jushan followed, his own trenchcoat flapping silently in the night. Sasuke walked beside his friend and looked him over, noting the differences between the Naruto he saw every day and the man before him. His entire wardrobe had changed. His normally sand-colored coat had changed to a deep blue, almost black. The symbol he wore on the shoulder had disappeared as well, replaced by an armored shoulder pad with whisper knives strapped to it. It also sported a hood, which Jushan had left down for the moment. At Juzen's belt, now non-ragged, were two saber hilts, deceptively non-threatening, and a straight katana with a guard-less hilt thrust through a leather loop. The blade had a ricasso, an unsharpened section of the blade above the hilt which competent users would wind a finger around for better control. It's a blade made for killing, thought Sasuke, amazed. His leather boots were the same ragged, worn leather, though they now had knife holsters strapped to them, adding another set of knives in his arsenal to the ones in easy reach. The main thing that disturbed him the most was that now Jushan wore a dark blue mask, covering his distinctive whisker birthmarks. The mask wrapped around his head, covering his blonde hair. The mask left only his eyes uncovered, which now had a red tint to them rather than the cerulean color they normally were. The mask had a pattern to it, white lines against the bluish black. When you looked at it right, The outline of a kitsune head would be seen, teeth bared in a feral smile. Sasuke shook his head, amazed how little he knew about his blonde friend. His eyes flicked over to Ni, who wore a greenish-black trench coat. A bandolier stretched from right shoulder to left hip, filled with various knives, some of which had cotton dipped in poison weaved through the holes in the blades, and senbon needles, poisoned as well. His sword also fit into a loop at his belt, though his was a ninjutsu with a black blade. A twisting dragon stretched from tip to hilt, fangs bared and blowing fire, red eyes almost glowing against the green scales. Great, thought Sasuke as Jushan handed him a hooded cloak, not unlike his own, and a cloth mask. I'm aiding a pair of psychopaths in a mission, deep in enemy territory, with an unknown number of hostiles ready for the slightest alert. Sasuke shook his head as he pulled on the cloak and mask. I'm fucked. Let's go, said Ni, leading the way into the night. 4 cells of Kusa nin patrolled the inside of the perimeter wall, all alert for any sign of trespassers. Their pattern seemed random enough, but, if one was patient, you could see that there was a pattern. Also, if one were to look close enough at the faces of the shinobi, they would notice that the Kusa nin wore white masks with the kanji for ne carved into the forehead. 40 meters away, Jushan removed his hand from the roof he knelt on, brushing dirt off on his boot as he consulted a sheet of paper. He had sent the force through the earth and felt the vibrations of the Kusa nin's footsteps. Noticing a discrepancy, turned to Ni and said, "The pattern has changed." "You're sure?" asked the poison master, confused. "Why would they have changed?" Sasuke spoke up, pulling his hood down over his eyes. "Maybe they knew you were coming." Ni swiveled around to glare at the Uchiha, eyes almost glinting. "Impossible. Only the Niwishi knew we were coming." Jushan turned back to the target's house, concentrating. Target's office. Tadokuro was not a happy man. He slammed a fist down on his desk, enraged. "Danzo promised that my participation would be completely hidden from our enemies," he raged at the Nei captain before him. "My identity was supposed to be hidden. Undetectable. No matter the promises, our spy tells us that the Niwishi are targeting you, aiming to cut off our weapons and supplies. If you fall, our work suffers delays, and Danzo-sama does not accept delays," said the Nei captain, his voice low, calm, and dangerous. Tadokuro shivered as the masked shinobi's words pierced his tirade. The man was scary, even though his mask hid any facial expression. "Well, take care of them. Kill them. I don't care how you do it, just do it quickly." With Jushan, Ni and Sasuke. Jushan opened his eyes, a small amount of shock going through his system. He quickly turned back to his comrades. "They didn't know we were coming. Danzo and his Nei were tipped off." "Who would know?" asked Ni, shaking his head. "Only the Niwishi KN." Ni's voice trailed off as he put 2 and 2 together, and came up with 5. "We have a spy amongst us." Jushan nodded. "The target's assassination will have to wait. We need help from the rest," he said, trailing off thoughtfully. "But whom do we trust?" Ni smiled beneath his hood. "How fast can you get a message to Konaha?" 3 hours, at tops. "Why? If you get a message to San, he'll get Nana, Roku and Q. All 3 owe me one, so I'm sure they can be trusted," said Ni, pulling a piece of paper from a pocket and scrawling a quick message. Jushan nodded as he flipped through a few hand seals. "Kuchiyose no jutsu," he said, slamming a palm onto the roof. Out of the resulting smoke came a 4-foot-tall, red-tailed eagle, carrying a pair of short katanas stuck in a red sash at its waist. Golden eyes glared at its blonde summoner. "Why hast thou summoned me, Uzumaki-san? I need you to get a message to a friend of mine, Nokona, and then summon your brother to provide transport." "Very well," said the hawk, bowing his slightly in acceptance and respect. "We will be back soon. Tell him to ask GG to provide a cover for us the rest of them," said Jushan, handing the note to his summon. "Very well," said the hawk, turning away. He spread his wings and took off, heading to Konaha at a high speed, mighty wings thrumming through the air. Jushan turned back to his friends, both showing a similar look of bewilderment. "When the fuck did you get a hawk summoning contract?" they chorused. Naruto grinned his trademark grin. The next day, 0845. Naruto and Sasuke had snuck back into their room at 2 in the morning, getting back before Kakashi woke in time to take his watch. Yakuso had returned to his family's house, waiting for the arrival of the Niwishi reinforcements. They were to arrive in time for the assassination. Naruto had sent the details of how it would go down to Sukapu, who would redistribute it to the rest. After Kakashi had gone out to gather some food for the rest at the market and Sakura was in the shower, Naruto and Sasuke were discussing their next move. Tadokuro is meeting with the Cage today, to take part in a parade celebrating a victory against Iwa. He'll ride with the Cage in his palanquin. We'll have to remove some guards, but that won't be a problem with 5 Niwishi and an Uchiha, said Naruto, showing Sasuke a map of the parade grounds. Sasuke nodded his understanding. Looks fun. Yeah, one question, though. How are you with long-range throws? Sasuke stared at Naruto, annoyance plain on his face. You know how well I throw, Dobi. Naruto laughed as he used a minor Kaiden jutsu and burnt the paper. Sasuke-kun? I can't reach my towel. Can you help me? Called Sakura from the washroom. Naruto and Sasuke looked at each other before shaking their heads. What kind of shinobi is she? They both thought in unison. Kami hates me, that's what it is, thought Naruto, quickly crossing the room and threw a towel into the bathroom. It flew like a boomerang, curving through the air, helped by the force, before flapping over Sakura's face. Turning back to Sasuke, he said, I'll send a pair of shadow clones with them when we leave. They'll be under a henge so well made that Kakashi won't be able to notice the difference. When we're finished, I'll transport us back and we'll Kawarimi with our clones and continue to Konaha. Sasuke nodded, pulling a new pair of weapons from his pack and began oiling them, preparing for battle. Sounds like a plan. Kusagakure Parade Grounds, 1204. Tadokuro and the Kusakage smiled and waved to the crowd as they were carried through the parade grounds, surrounded by 10 shinobi with long-bladed spears. The spearmen wore heavy armor, metal plates glinting in the sunlight. The crowd's mood was euphoric, making Tadokuro almost forget about the Niwishi assassins out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. He waved to the crowd, reveling in the cheers sounding in his ears. The masked and cloaked form of Jushan stood in the shadow of a side alley, smiling grimly behind his mask as the Kusakage and Tadokuro rode past. Now, we finish this. He began his walk, exiting the alley and joining the crowd, threading his way through the happy masses. He pushed his way through, making good time even though he boxed in on all sides. Above him, a knee on the rooftop took notice of his approach, drawing a kunai and taking aim at the intruder. Before he let the kunai fly, a shadow fell across his mask. He looked up to see another masked and cloaked nin, though this one had locks of straight violet hair poking out from under her hood, poised to slit his throat with a kunai slash. The blade sang through the air before cutting through the knee's throat. He slumped to the roof, crimson staining the once pristine mask. A pair of nei stood in Juzan's path. One took notice of the masked figure immediately, drew his sword and charged him. His partner followed suit, drawing a pair of kunai as he ran. The first was downed by an airborne kunai in the back of the neck, lodging deep between the vertebrae of the man's spine. He grasped at the back of his head as he fell, trying in vain to remove the kunai. His partner fell to a similar fate, a kunai to the throat spilling his blood on the street. Jushan passed their fallen corpses, not sparing them a glance. The crowd parted before him, splitting like the Red Sea. Whisper sprang up as he passed, the villagers wondering who he was and why he was here. Juzan's pace was calm, as if he had not nearly been killed 3 times. The only thing that mattered to him now was his target. A second pair of nei noticed the crowd parting behind them. They turned to find Jushan a foot from them. He flicked his hands, causing knives to fall out of his sleeves into his palms. Both knives sought a resting place in the knees' throats. One grasped at Juzan's arm as the blade cut deep into his throat, the other letting a grunt of pain escape his lips as they both fell to the road beneath their feet. 2 of the guards around the palanquin noticed the nei falling to the ground, blood pooling around them. They unlimbered their spears and took a step towards Jushan. Before they could take a second step, he quickly threw the knives, embedding them in the chests of the spear nin, passing through their armor like a razor through tissue paper. They fell grasping at the knives, more victims of the Niwishi. The rest of the spear shinobi encircled Jushan as he halted in the middle of the street, their spears aimed at his throat. He smiled beneath his mask, not caring that 8 razor-sharp blades were inches from his throat. Tadokuro chuckled as he stepped off the palanquin. Jushan of the Niwishi, brave of you to stand alone against me, but also quite foolish, he said, smiling as the guards brought the spears closer to Juzan's throat. Jushan took no notice of their actions, ignoring them as he reached out and caught a hawk feather out of midair. "Assassin," Tadokuro growled, a sinister grin spreading across his face. Jushan looked up as a hawk let out a scream. He nodded at his allies, using the force to find hidden on the rooftops. The circle of spearmen disintegrated, each falling with a throwing knife in their back, neck or chest. Jushan casually pushed one to the ground as he stumbled forward. As the man fell, he took a step forward with an air of arrogance. The unspoken, "Can you stop me?" was clear to Tadokuro. Tadokuro was startled at the quick decimation of his men. How? He thought as he gestured for two men to attack the assassin. As they attacked, Tadokuro surveyed the rooftops, looking for the knife throwers. How many are there? The closest attacker went for an overhand strike, hoping to strike Juzan's head from his shoulders. Jushan ducked the strike and cut out his knees as he flew past, his inertia helping Juzan's Chikudo slice between the knee joints. He fell, grasping at his shins, which now lay 2 feet from where they should be. The second went for a low strike, aiming to do the same to Jushan. A spinning hop over the blade left the nin stumbling a few steps before he, too, fell, the blade of Jushan cutting his neck so deeply he was almost decapitated. Jushan flicked his blade, allowing the blood to slide off, leaving his steel glinting in the sunlight. "Thorn," called Tadokuro, summoning his 5 squads of personal Kusa guards. The 5 4-man squads came in 2 single file lines out of the building, forming up around Tadokuro, who drew his own sword. He smiled as he outnumbered the Niwishi assassin. Jushan smiled as he saw Tadokuro's eyes widen as his allies formed up behind him. Sasuke, again wearing his borrowed cloak and mask, twirled a pair of hook swords. He had been training with them since the time he began a genin. Naruto is a good teacher, thought Sasuke. Roku, wearing his brown hooded cloak and a shit-eating grin, had a short blade in his left hand and his punch dagger in his right. "Greetings, Jushan," he drawled as he rolled his shoulders, loosening his muscles for the main event. Nate twirled his blowtube in one hand and his dragon-marked sword in his other, ready for battle. Nana flicked her hands, letting 4 senbon fall between her fingers in each hand. "Konnichiwa, Jushan. Nice weather we're having." Q nodded his greetings. Jushan inclined his head in greeting to all, analyzing the unknown Niwishi. Q was about 6 foot, 8 inches, towering above his comrades. His face was hidden by a deep hood and a large mask, nearly reaching the edge of the hood. Q wore worn leather boots, ragged leather straps wrapped around his legs up to his knees, binding a knife holster to his right boot. His belt was ragged leather, a variety of knives thrust in their respective sheaths. A large knife was strapped to his thigh in what Jushan assumed was a quick-draw holster. He wore a black short-sleeved shirt with a red cross on the chest, arms bare. A half-cloak covered his left arm, the strap crossing his chest also holding a trio of throwing knives. It was the weapon he held in his hand that drew Juzan's attention, an 8-foot-tall wooden staff with a volg at the top. "Ready?" asked Jushan, twirling his sword. It was Q who spoke the feelings of all. "Even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we fear no evil, for we are the meanest sons of bitches in the valley." "That's what I thought," said Naruto. As one, the Niwishi charged the 21 men. A few feet from the enemy lines, they leapt over the Kusa nin's blades, bypassing the deadly steel. The first 5 men were dropped with skull-crushing sidekicks. The Kusa nin's heads snapped back, their necks breaking under the force of the Niwishi's blows. Their line broken, the Kusa nin scrambled to avoid the blades of Sasuke, Jushan, and Roku. The volg of Q. The seemingly endless supply of senbon from Nana and the poisoned darts of Ne. Out of the 16 men who remained after the kicks, 3 lost their heads to the long-reaching blade of Q, twirling the heavy polearm as if it were as light as a baton. His eyes were alight with the joy of battle. Another was dispatched by a poison dart. The ninja collapsed, the poisons in the dart burning through his veins, feeling as if his blood had been replaced with acid. Sasuke took 2 down with his swords, decapitating one by crossing his blades and drawing them apart, and hitting the second with the pommel daggers by hooking one blade on the other. Roku deflected a blade with his forearm before sticking his punch dagger through the solar plexus of his attacker. He pulled out the dagger as he blocked a blade from behind his head with his short blade. The dying man dropped, trying to force his lungs to draw in air. He spun to attack an enemy, his blades a flurry of bloodletting steel. Nana dropped a Kusa nin 12 feet away, her senbon peppering the man from chest to eye. He fell grasping at the little needles, trying to remove them from his eye, heart and lungs. Jushan sliced one across the stomach, causing him to bend over to try and hold onto his guts. Jushan rolled over him, kicked his legs out from under him, and used the force to push the body away, pinning Tadokuro to the ground with the dead weight. 4 Kusa nin launched themselves at the Niwishi, hoping their surprise attack would surprise the assassins. Their eyes aflame with anger at the casual slaughter of their comrades, they roared the wordless battle cry of anger. Before they even made it 3 feet from them, they were riddled with throwing knives of all sizes, senbon and many poisoned darts. The men stumbled, still trying to attack despite the sheer mass of damage inflicted on them. One made it within striking range, though he fell with a gurgle as Sasuke slashed out his throat. Sasuke closed his eyes as the arterial blood spray splashed over his face, momentarily blinding him. He wiped his eyes clean with his sleeve as he turned away. He opened one eye in time to see the last Kusa nin launch a slash at his face. "Oh, fuck," thought Sasuke as he tried to make the block. He moved to slow. He blinked as he prepared to meet the kami. Jushan leapt in front of Sasuke, catching the slash with his face, the blade carving a path from hairline to his chin, cutting through his eye. Sasuke opened his eyes to see his friend bleeding, blood dripping off his face onto the ground, some spreading down his face in a gruesome mask. Within Sasuke, something broke, unleashing a feeling of power. Sasuke felt as if he had just eaten 4 soldier pills, his body so energized he was nearly quivering with unspent energy. The Kusa nin went for a finishing blow on Jushan, blade raised for a throat slice. He swung his arm down. He was confused when his arm came down, only to find a stump of an arm, the other half falling to the ground, still holding the sword. He looked up at his attacker and noticed something different. His attacker now had red eyes. "Sharingan," he whispered before the hook sword sliced his head from his body. Sasuke turned to see Jushan grinning, his eye and face healing fast enough that when Sasuke took a double take, all that was left was blood staining the mask he wore. "What are you smiling at?" "I knew that would work," said Jushan, pointing at his eyes. Sasuke held up his hook sword, using the steel to see his reflection. His eyes saw the red iris and a black tomo surrounding it. He grinned beneath his mask. "Finally, I've unlocked my Kekkei Genkei." A groan drew the attention from Sasuke's newest addition. Draw the Niwishi's gaze to Tadokuro, still pinned to the ground by the weight of his guard's dead body. He strained against the man's weight, but he wasn't strong enough to shift the dead weight. "Ah, Tadokuro, I presume," said Jushan, striding forward to stand over him. "You've been orchestrating the delivery of various weapons, poisons and supplies to the organization known as NE. For these crimes, I, Jushan of the Niwishi, condemn you to death. May the kami have mercy on your soul." Jushan raised his sword and quickly cut the man's head from his shoulders. Tadokuro's head bounced away, landing facing the cage's palanquin, its eyes glazed over in death. A pool of blood formed around the head, adding to the blood spatters across the street. The cage's blubbering drew their attention to the palanquin. The cage was cowering and crying like a baby, huddling in the corner of the shoulder cart. "Ah, Kusakage-sama," said Jushan, flicking his sword in a quick arc to clean the blood off. The rest of the Niwishi did the same. Each slash and blood spray made the cage flinch, making Jushan's previous assumptions of him vanish like smoke in high wind. "We have judged Tadokuro accordingly," said Jushan, drawing on Kyuubi's chakra to make his eyes flash red. The cage shrank even further in the box, trepidation clear on his face. "I judge you, now." Naruto turned away, bit his thumb, and flashed through 5 hand seals. A giant plume of smoke appeared, concealing the Niwishi. The Niwishi reappeared atop a giant hawk. The hawk had a katana in its sash and a scar crossing its face above its beak. He turned a freezing glare on the cage and the other ninja who appeared on the scene. Jushan stood and turned back to the cage, his eyes still red. "I find you wanting." With that, he leapt atop the hawk. With a flap of its mighty wings, the Niwishi flew off into the noon sky, leaving the blood-stained earth as a testament to their prowess. 500 feet above the earth. So, said Naruto, pulling off his mask and throwing back the hood of his cloak as he sat on the hawk's back. What's your story, Q? Well, said Q, pulling back his own hood and mask, mirroring his ally. My name is Arai Danto, former Jonin of Konaha, honorably discharged. My fiancée was murdered while I was fighting during the Third Great Shinobi War. The man who killed her was part of Ne. Only when my revenge is complete can I join her, my quest fulfilled. Where'd you get that halberd? Asked Sasuke, wind ruffling his hair as they flew through the air. He openly stared at Danto's choice of weapon. Took it off a dead Iwa Nin. He didn't need it. Naruto looked over the side of the hawk. Noticing 4 specks on the road to Konaha, he smiled. Sasuke, this is our stop. Naruto stood and addressed his friends. Gentlemen, nodding to Roku and Danto. Milady, bowing to Nana. I'll say hi to Kakashi for you. You will always remember this as the day I leapt from a giant hawk 500 feet above the earth. With that, he pulled Sasuke with him, over the edge. Kakashi and his team walked down the road, unaware of the carnage that had been released on Kusa after they left, nor did they notice 2 falling specks, silently descending through the air at great speed. Approximately 356 featuring above said road. If this fall doesn't kill us, I'm gonna kill you, shouted Sasuke as he fell, spread eagle, towards the ground, trying to slow his descent. How the hell are we going to get out of this? Back in Kusa, Ni had vanished, leaving the disrupted festival to die out by itself. I just want to get home, he thought. Walking down the side alley, slowly removing his Niwishi attire and sheathing his katana. Hello, Ni. Yakuso turned and smiled up at the cloaked form of Jushan, sitting atop a building like a gargoyle, watching him. You can read my mind. Nice trick. You wished to talk, my friend? Asked the assassin, jumping down to stand in front of him. I'm getting too old for this, said Yakuso, indicating the sheathed katana in his fist. I want to stop the fight, spend my days running the store with my family, you know? Jushan nodded, understanding completely. Ni wanted his old life back, the one where he didn't have to lie to his wife about where he was. Where he didn't have to wonder about what would happen to his family if he died. He wanted to be there when his family needed him, not off on some mission for the Niwishi. You will always have a place amongst us, brother, said Jushan, holding out his hand, a last parting of warrior brothers. Be safe. Yakuso grabbed the offered hand and pulled him into a hug, forcing the younger man's spine out of alignment. Goodbye, Jushan. They released each other and turned away, Yakuso returning to his normal life, Jushan returning to the war that no one would ever know of. Jushan stopped and half turned back, wondering what his friend wanted. He was surprised to see a large bundle of cloth fly at his head. Not so surprised, however, that he didn't catch it. What's this? He asked, unfolding the cloak. Within the folds were all manner of darts and other poisoned weapons. Within a pocket were books, Yakuso's tight script filling the margins. That's all my gear, all my poison-making supplies, all my knowledge. You never know when a little poison may save your life, said the man, smiling. Arigato, Ni. And here, shouted the former Ni, tossing the katana he held at his friend. You never know when an extra blade could help you as well. With that, Yakuso walked away, leaving his shadowy life behind him. Jushan caught the blade and stored it as seal, along with the other gear Yakuso gave him. Thus exits the master of poison, Doku Yakuso, greatest bearer of the title Ni. He will be missed, though his actions will be remembered throughout the organization. I'm still alive, but you are gone. I remember you, so you are eternal. With a few hand seals and a little blood, Jushan summoned a hawk the size of his forearm. He nodded at the avian, mentally giving him the necessary coordinates. That done, he locked himself into a seal on the bandolier of the falcon, ready for transport back to Konaha. Amidst the chaos of the assassination, no one noticed the hawk take flight, heading home, cage bunchen in its seal. Back in midair, Naruto merely smiled as he pulled off his Jushan attire and weapons, quickly storing them in a seal on the side of his neck, all whilst in midair. Once back in his regular attire, looking very much like he had just walked out of Kei's no Kuni, he asked, "Remember how I'm telekinetic?" "I really hope so," shouted Sasuke, looking down at the rapidly approaching ground. There were only about 100 feet between them and the unforgiving dirt. Whatever you're gonna do, do it now. Naruto shook his head at his friend's reaction. Who knew the mighty Uchiha was afraid of heights? He closed his eyes and concentrated, drawing on the force. He welcomed the familiar rush of power and focused it, slowing their descent and maneuvering them into an upright position. Just for the hell of it, he created an illusion for Sasuke that made it look like he was still falling. I'm so evil. Yeah, sure you are, said the sarcastic voice of Kyuubi, rolling his eyes at his campaigner's antics. For once, thought Kyuubi, can he do something really evil? Nah. A second or two later, their boots touched the dusty road, stepping off the air as if they had been walking for a long time. Sasuke flinched, eyes shut as his feet touched the earth. After a few seconds and no painful impacts on his person, he opened one eye. Finding himself on the ground, safe and sound, he looked around for Naruto, ready to give him a piece of his mind. Naruto was walking away, going to join Kakashi, Sakura, and the Hengid Cage Bunchins when Sasuke put him in a chokehold from behind. I'm gonna kill you, Naruto called on the force, casually pulling him off his back. He turned around, set Sasuke back on the ground, and asked, is there a problem? We just fell 500 feet. I thought we were gonna die, yelled Sasuke, poking him in the chest. You whine like a mule, Naruto retorted, clapping Sasuke on the shoulder before walking towards Team 7. You are still alive. Sasuke opened his mouth to retort, but paused as he realized that Naruto was right. He was still alive. And, better still, he had activated his Kekkei Genkai, the Sharingan. Life was good. Sasuke sighed and looked skyward and silently cursed whatever deity deemed it necessary for him to be here with Naruto. I'm going to die before I'm 20, I just know it. Heaven. Kami consulted her lifeline charts. This is interesting. Back on the ground, as one, Naruto and Sasuke coweramied with their clones, and walked back to Konaha, sharing a conspiratorial smile when Kakashi ordered them to hurry up, wanting to make good time back to Konaha and Anko. Naruto kept his face impassive as he watched his hawk summon fly back to Konaha, much faster than the team. If only he knew. Konohagakure, a day later. The village was peaceful, just as they left it. Children running around playing games, adults buying and selling, walking and laughing and talking, regular civilian procedures. Everything was fine, or so the civilians thought. The returning Team 7 saw the ninja side of the village. Well, everyone but Sakura did. She was too busy fawning over Sasuke to notice. Naruto shot her a glance as she repeatedly asked if Sasuke was interested in a date. This girl really needs to get serious or she'll get herself killed on the next mission. Naruto sensed the Anbu unit who patrolled the rooftops, fast enough not to be seen by the civilians. Other undercover ninja walked about, dressed like civilians. It was their movements gave them away. Each gesture was measured, an uncanny grace to them. This could be noticed by any ninja of worth. Meaning Kakashi, Sasuke and Naruto saw the telltale signs that something was wrong immediately. Kakashi shot a look up at the rooftops, meeting the eyes of a Taka-masked Anbu unit. A quick exchange of hand signs had Kakashi shooting a glance at the blonde force user. This is not good. The Anbu had signed, Hyuga captured by enemy. Naruto read his mind and quickly accessed the force, searching for the one Hyuga he cared most about. The next instant, he disappeared, the after image fading slowly away. Sasuke noticed one very ominous detail. Naruto's eyes had turned red. This is not a good sign, he thought as he watched Naruto's image blur and disappear. Sasuke shook his head, wondering what this whole thing was about and ran after him, blurring out of existence as well. Kakashi sighed, knowing he was about to get a headache. His Anbu hand signs were a bit rusty, but he had gotten the gist of the message. He shunshined away, leaving Sakura blinking at the gate. Where did everyone go? Hokage's office. Where is she? Asked Naruto, his voice barely audible over the feral growl in his voice. Naruto, calm down, said Hiruzen, trying to placate the blonde who was actually emitting chakra. The elderly Kage actually felt a twinge of fear as he stared into the now violent crimson eyes of his surrogate grandson. We just received word an hour ago. Who brought the news? Growled Naruto, eyes pulsing red with anger. Inazuka Kiba, Aburame Shino, and Jonin Yuhi Kuranai, said the Hokage, leaning back against his chair. He took out his pipe and used a minor Kaiden jutsu to light the tobacco. "They're in the hospital. They'll tell you everything." Naruto left so fast the cage didn't even see him move, leaving an afterimage to glare at Hiruzen until it faded from existence. Sasuke and Kakashi stuck their heads through the door and quickly looked around for Naruto. Seeing Hiruzen all alone, they looked at each other and exchanged questioning glances. "Come in, Kakashi, Sasuke. I had to tell you something." The Konaha hospital? Naruto walked into the room, noting the three ninja before him. Kiba and Shino were sitting together, talking in hushed tones. Akamaru sat at the end of Kiba's bed, looking as sad as a dog could possibly look. Kurenai was staring out the window, a look of abject sadness on her face. "Naruto?" asked Kiba, noting the red eyes of his friend standing in the doorway. Shino and Kurenai whipped around to face the blonde ninja, noting the barely controlled expression he wore. "What happened?" he growled, eyes glowing. The members of Team 8 felt a twinge of fear, listening to the bestial tone in his voice. Akamaru whined, not used to this feeling. Kiba was amazed, though still afraid. "He's not even using killing intent," he thought, bewildered. The stoic Shino spoke up, pushing his sunglasses up on his nose. "It's a long story. 2 days ago." Kiba was nearly bursting with excitement as he walked down the dirt road with his team. After they had finished with their D-class mission, Kurenai had led the team back to the Hokage's office and asked for a C-class, hoping there was one available after Kakashi and his cell had taken the first one out from under their noses. "We just received a new one, suitable for your team," said Hiruzen, reaching into his desk for the scroll. "Tazuna-san has hired a team to escort him back to his homeland. It's low risk, just protection from bandits and the like. It should be good for your team." "Arigato, Hokage-sama. When do we leave?" asked Kurenai, placing the scroll in her kunai pouch. "Tazuna," called the Hokage. "We have a team for you." The door to the waiting room slid open, revealing the customer. Tazuna was a carpenter, judging by the faint smell of wood about him. The aroma was almost missed, however, by the stink of alcohol, the bottle in his right hand. He wore a black sleeveless shirt and tan pants, a hat hanging on his back from a cord around his neck. He was an elderly man, his hair gray from age. He had a look of skepticism on his face, looking over each member of the team. "This is my ninja team?" he asked, disbelief plain on his face. "I get a model who's probably afraid to break a nail, a kid who looks like a dog with a puppy, a blind girl who looks like she'd trip over anything, and a guy who has bugs crawling over his hands." Each team member blinked as Tazuna spouted off each first impression of them. Kurenai was stuck between feeling flattered, enraged and insulted. Kiba was contemplating murder, along with Akamaru. "Stupid little drunk." Shino looked down at his Kakaichu and shrugged, not really caring what the drunken man said. Hinata raised an eyebrow at Tazuna's assumption of her. "He thinks I'm blind?" Sarutobi Hiruzen was currently fighting a rather large attack of laughter, the corner of his eye twitching as he sought to contain his amusement. Taking a deep breath, Hiruzen calmed down. "Tazuna-san, this is Team 8, led by Yuhi Kurenai. They have proven themselves to be a formidable force. You're safe with them." "Sure," said Tazuna, taking a swig from his bottle. "Whatever you say." They had set out within the hour, heading for Nami no Kuni. Shino spoke up, breaking the silence. "Tazuna-san, are there ninja where you come from?" Tazuna nearly tripped over his own feet at the mentioning of the word ninja, causing the rest of Team 8 to watch him out of the corner of their eyes, silently gauging his reaction. No ninja, only random bandits and vagabonds and such," sputtered out Tazuna, sweat forming on his brow despite the cool weather. "No ninja." Shino looked at Kurenai, who nodded in agreement. There was something wrong, definitely wrong. Hinata turned her Byakugan on, actively scanning for enemies, since Tazuna seemed almost on the edge of bolting for any possible shelter, eyes darting from one side to side. 2 chakra signatures appeared at the edge of her vision, about 100 meters ahead. By the fluctuations, Hinata assumed they were using a henge of some sort. A quick look at Shino, Kiba and Kurenai with a raised eyebrow assured her that she was not the only one to notice. Shino had been sending Kakaichu out ahead of him, scouting for foreign chakra. One of the destruction beetles had sensed the chakra emanating from the puddle and reported back to Shino, forewarning him. Kiba and Akamaru had scented the hidden ninja, the odor of the human body quite distinct despite being diluted because of the water. Hinata began to whistle a jovial tune, smiling all the while as she channeled some chakra to her hands in preparation for her jukin. As they walked past the puddle, Hinata close enough to nearly step in it, two men rose from the puddle, both wearing clawed gauntlets and breathing masks. One jumped into the air, trailing a shuriken chain from his gauntlet. He landed on the other side of Kurenai, looping the bladed chain around her. With a pull from either side, the chain tightened and cut through the Jonin, turning her into piles of meat. Team 8 didn't even flinch, already in motion. Hinata struck a trio of points on the Nukanen, effectively cutting off all motor control to his arms and legs. Shino and Kiba attacked as one, using a few quick punches from each of them to the second Nukanen's jaw, knocking him into dreamland. Hinata dragged the first to a tree and spun a hoop of ninja wire around him, binding him to the tree. Kiba and Shino tossed the second to her, whom she bound to the tree as well. "Kurenai-sensei, you can come out now," called Hinata, finishing a knot with a tug. Tazuna nearly jumped 10 feet in the air as Kurenai stepped out from behind a tree, a mere foot away from him. "WHWH when? How?" Kurenai shot him a sideways glare. "Kawarimi, a ninja's best friend." She then looked at the two ninja bound to the tree. "Gozu and Maizu, if I'm not mistaken. The Oni Kyodai, known for their coordinated attacking. Nukanen for about a year, from Kusagakure." Kurenai turned to her client, who was now sweating buckets as she turned her red-eyed glare at him. "I was under the impression that there were no ninja with a contract on your life, Tazuna-san. Why is there a pair of chunin after you?" Tazuna sighed and sat on a log, pulling off his hat. "My country couldn't afford an A-class mission price, so I lied. If I don't make it back alive and finish my bridge, Nami no Kuni will be under Gato's thumb forever." Hinata looked over as she double-checked the knots in the wire. "Gato? Of Gato Shipping Company? Yes. Gato has impoverished our land, turning us into a hunger-stricken country rather than the monopoly we used to be. As long as the bridge to the mainland remains unfinished, we are doomed to die, hungry in our own land," said Tazuna, hanging his head. "There, I've told them everything, now they're going to leave me to die from the next bandit or assassin Gato sends." Kurenai looked over at her team, noting the masked emotions. Kiba was barely containing a look of rage while Shino was stoic as he usually was, though he was repeatedly clenching his right hand, a sign Kurenai had linked to Shino's strongest anger. Hinata was perfectly calm, though her eyes betrayed her. A slight squint to them told Kurenai everything she needed to know. "Despite your deception," she said, making Tazuna look up, a faint glint of hope in his eye. "We will accompany you to your homeland and provide protection until your bridge is finished." Tazuna had a grin so wide Hinata was surprised that his cheeks didn't rip open. He slipped to his knees and kowtowed to the ninja, thanking them profusely. "Get up," Kurenai commanded, pulling Tazuna to his feet by his collar. "We have a lot of walking to do, so get moving." After a minute of punching the nearly conscious demon brothers back into the dreamscape, the group set off, once again heading to Nami no Kuni. That night, Kurenai sat on a log she had pulled close to the fire, silently watching the forest for any sign of an enemy. It was only another hour until Hinata would relieve her, though it seemed like forever to one so sleep-deprived. "I knew I shouldn't have let Asuma stay over last night." A twig snapped, causing her to jump up from a seated position and spin 180 degrees, drawing a kunai as she went. 4 men in black cloaks stood behind her, their faces covered by their hood, shielding their identities. One stepped forward, hands held up placidly. "We do not wish to harm you, Yuhi Kurenai." "How do you know my name?" she asked, drawing a second kunai. She silently focused her chakra and sent a trio of bursts at the tents of her genin, hoping the chakra pulses would awaken them. "You shouldn't have done that, Yuhi," said the man, a distinct threat in the undertone of his voice. Hinata, Kiba and Shino simultaneously burst out of their tents. Hinata had chakra in her hands and her Byakugan activated, dropping into a Jukin stance beside her sensei. Kiba and Akamaru had performed their Jujin Bushin as they exited their tent, turning Akamaru into a clone of Kiba. As one, they activated Shikyaku no Jutsu, changing to more feral-like appearances, their canine teeth, their finger and toenails growing to claw-like length, their eyes becoming wilder with their pupils becoming slits. Shino had bugs slowing out of his sleeves, forming ominous, writhing black clouds at his hands, the bugs silently flying around him. The added effect of the fire flickering behind the team gave them a frightening appearance. Usually such an effect would cause their enemies to give them second thoughts, perhaps even making them turn tail and run. The black-cloaked men, however, were unimpressed. The man in the lead held up his hand as the three behind him tensed up, preparing for a fight. "Stop," he barked, freezing the men in mid-action. Addressing Team 8, he said, "We do not wish to fight, Konaha nen." Kiba growled from his crouched position, Akamaru providing an overtone. "We won't let you kill Tazuna, assassin scum." The rest of the team nodded in agreement with what the feral teammate said. They readied themselves, suspecting this was going to be a fight to the death. They were surprised when the black-clad man asked, "Who?" With a confused look on her face, Kurenai asked, "Tazuna, the bridge builder?" At the blank stares, she added, "The one Gato hired you to kill?" Again with the blank stares. "Oh, you mean the civilian," said the man, indicating the last tent with a jerk of his head. "No, no, no. We aren't here for him." This statement caused more confusion to the members of Team 8, making them look at each other with question-laden glances. "Then who are you here for?" asked Shino, bugs still flying from his sleeves. "An excellent question, my Aburame friend," said the man, waving a hand in Shino's direction as he began to pace between the two lines of fighters. "We are here for the child of the prophecy." "Who?" chorused the Genin and Jonin, confusion across their faces. "Her, of course," said the man, pointing at Hinata. As one, Akamaru and Kiba growled, Shino glared, and Kurenai narrowed red eyes at the men. "There's no way in hell we're letting you take her," yelled Kiba, claw-tipped fingers digging into the earth. The man sighed, shaking his head. "We do not wish to fight." "Too bad. If you want her, you'll have to fight for her." The man glanced at his companions and nodded. In unison, they each flicked one of their wrists, dropping a weapon into their hands. "Very well," the man said, forming the tip of a wedge. The men charged, their glowing blue and green blades buzzing and crackling in the night air. Jushan sat at the end of the table, his fingers steepled as he listened to the Niwishi argue, each trying to ascertain the best solution to the missing Hyuga problem, as they called it. "Why not leave her? We have more pressing matters than the kidnapping of one Hyuga. If we leave her, who is to say that Kumo won't hear about it and try to buy her from these men? We exist to eliminate Ne and protect Konaha. If we let Kumo, or any other, nation steal the powers of our Kekkei Genkei, they will inevitably be used against us, sooner or later. We must save the Hyuga." His eyes flashed red as he heard Ju suggest that the Niwishi just leave Hinata to her fate. "You will die, traitor, for revealing this to our enemies. You only draw breath because I care more for my Hinata than your betrayal. Your time will come," he thought darkly, slowly letting his rage dissipate. "You can wait? Now is not the time for discussion," yelled Kyubi, practically snarling from within. "These so-called master of the force must be shown who's boss. No one takes what is precious to us and gets away with it." "Enough!" shouted Jushan, effectively ending all other conversation in the room. The 11 Niwishi in the room froze as they felt an immense chakra pulse, emanating from their newest member. Ichi opened his mouth so speak, probably to reprimand the teen, though Naruto beat him to it. "I am leaving for Nami no Kuni. None of you will be following me," he said, holding up his hand to forestall any complaints. "I feel that Ne will be on the move in the days to come, hence the reason I will be taking Uchiha Sasuke along with me." "Why would you take him?" asked Ichi, folding his hand before his face, leaning on his elbows. He looked up sharply as he realized what his intentions for the young Uchiha were. "You want him to join us? Ne has left us to rejoin his family. I see no reason why the boy should not be asked to join us," said Nana, adding her 2 cents. "I saw him take down some of our opponents in Kusa, the elite Thorn units. He's powerful, more so now than ever now that he has activated his Sharingan." "I agree as well, Ichi." Everyone who had not been on the Kusa mission turned in surprise as the mountain commonly known as Q spoke, his deep voice rumbling through the meeting room. "The Uchiha has proved himself to be a strong warrior, worthy of my respect. I would be proud to be at his side on any battlefield." Ichi was speechless for a moment, contemplating the recent commendation by Q. "Very well, Jushan. Take the Uchiha with you. If he's as good as you say he is, He will be an asset to the cause. Jushan stood and collected his saber handles from the table. I will return when the Hyuga is safe, he said, walking for the door. Nana and Roku nodded to him as he left. Q gave him a casual salute as he passed his chair, dark eyes twinkling behind his mask. Jushan pulled the lever that moved the fake stone that hid their headquarters and leapt out into the night, heading for the Uchiha complex. Sasuke has a new mission, thought Jushan as he jumped through the forest. Uchiha Complex. 2,245 hours. The Uchiha complex was dark, its sole occupant fast asleep. Being the only Uchiha left, the entire complex had no guards, allowing a dark shadow to climb over the walls and crawl up the side of the Uchiha's room without incidents. Sasuke, whispered Naruto, crouched on the wall beside the vertical side of the window leading to Sasuke's room. Get up, you lazy piece of shit. The window opened slowly, revealing the sleepy face of Sasuke, his hair a mess, one hand rubbing the sleep from his eyes. What, he asked slowly, is so Kami damned important enough to wake me at midnight? I'm going after Hinata, said Naruto, talking as if discussing the quiet night around them, his eyes showing he was very far from here, probably sensing for Hinata. Kami, damn these force users. They're blocking my sense. Sasuke's head snapped up, all anger forgotten, instantly alert. Are you insane? Oh, right. You are. You heard the Hokage. We have no intel on these kidnappers. We have no idea who the child of the prophecy is or what their motives are. He hissed, staring at the blonde with a look of disbelief on his face. Besides, you have never disobeyed an order from the Hokage. Why are you going to start now? Asked Sasuke, beckoning him in. Naruto placed a hand on the top of the window and swung in, landing silent as a wraith and twice as deadly. His orders have never held me back from someone I loved. Sasuke grabbed a shirt and pulled it on, glaring at the blonde with activated Sharingan as he began to assemble weapons. One day, I'm gonna need your help and I better not hear any shit from you. Why'd I always get roped into these things? You care for her almost as much as I do, said Naruto, reaching to a seal located on his back, just above his kidney. Leave all your shinobi gear, except for your hook swords. Why? Asked Sasuke, pausing in mid-motion, a box of kunai in his hand. Why no shuriken or kunai? Naruto pulled a saber hilt from beneath his cloak and tossed it to his black-haired brother in arms. The men who took Hinata do not fight with steel and iron. Their blades are like mine, able to cut through damn near anything. It's high time you learned some saber combat. Sasuke caught the blade's hilt, thumbed the activation switch, unleashing a blade as red as his eyes, humming slightly as he swung it in an arc. Nice color. Nicer edge, said Naruto, activating one his own. Use your Sharingan and copy my forms. We only have a few hours before the Anbu on duty change shifts. How do you know when the Anbu change shifts? Naruto formed a dozen cage bunchins behind him. Our name is Legion, for we are many, they said, their voices combined to make an unnerving tone. The original Naruto smiled as Sasuke gaped for a second. I'm Konaha's Kokushu Warifusaka. Right, Sasuke said, rolling his eyes. So how do these forms go anyways? Naruto activated his saber and assumed the starting stance of Makashi. Since we'll be fighting other saber wielders, Makashi will be one we'll be focusing on. Sasuke watched Naruto, his Sharingan spinning. One question. Who named this shit? Naruto reached over with his free hand and slapped his brother upside the head. Gates of Konaha. A pair of Anbu walked past the gate, their white masks slightly visible in the dark, their cloaks blending seamlessly with the darkness. They walked through the gates, nodding to the two Anbu who were walking back into Konaha. The returning Anbu raised their hands and formed a hand seal, one of the two seals the Anbu used to identify another Anbu unit. It changed every day or two, depending on the mood of the Hokage, thus making an Anbu disguise useless unless you knew what seal matched the other. The outgoing Anbu flashed a hand sign and continued on their way. The lack of aggression towards them meant they had revealed the correct seal. The two Anbu looked at each other as they entered the forest, making sure the other Anbu were out of range. One removed his mask, revealing onyx eyes and hair. How did you know? You know what? Never mind. The second Anbu removed his mask and cloak, dropping them onto the ground with a whisper of fabric and a clunk of porcelain hitting the ground. Underneath were Naruto's normal clothes, his sand-colored cloak flapping slightly in the breeze. A porcelain half-mask hung from his belt, made to cover his face up to his nose, leaving his eyes and forehead bare. His trademark smile was in full effect as he started running, heading for the land of waves, Sasuke following behind him, his new lightsaber hilt tucked into his belt. "Can you sense her?" asked Sasuke, swinging under a branch. "I mean, you'd know if she was." He trailed off, noting the slight tenseness to his brother's muscles. "Sorry," he muttered, focusing on his path through the forest. 2 hours later, Naruto paused on a tree branch, crouched like the lethal predator he was. He held up his fist, causing Sasuke to halt right beside him. A question-filled glance had Naruto signing in Embu sign language, something he, Sasuke and Hinata had learned from Kakashi during a period between missions. 2 chakra sigs, 2 kilometers ahead, signed Naruto, pointing directly ahead of him. High Jonin level. Sasuke nodded and readied his saber hilt, his thumb hovering over the activator. "Let's go," he signed back. They both moved as one, covering the distance between the chakra signatures in less than a minute. Silently, they peered around leaves and tree trunks, eyeing the pair sitting around a campfire. One wore a sleeveless black shirt, his face wrapped in bandages that pulled around his neck. A Kiri Hite 8 was strapped to the side of his head, a single cut through the symbol of Kiri. A giant blade was stuck in the ground, looming over the man who sat on the log. Assuming that he was correct, Naruto assumed the weapon was Kabikuri Hocho and the man was Momochi Zabuza, the Kusagakure no Kijin. The woman who sat beside him was dressed in the garb of a Kiri Oinen. Her porcelain mask featured the symbol of Kusagakure in the middle of the forehead, a swirl starting from the right of the mask and ending in the center, and a curved triangle starting from the jawline and ending near the center of the mask. The man reached over and pulled his blade from the ground, showing a tremendous amount of skill as he held it one-handed, outstretched to his right. "I'm going for more firewood," Zabuza said, shouldering the giant blade. He quickly turned and left, leaving the Oinen alone by the firelight. Naruto and Sasuke leapt down from the tree and approached on foot, trying to be non-threatening. The Oinen turned her head slightly as they approached the camp, merely nodding in greetings. Sasuke and Naruto nodded as well as they cautiously looked around for Zabuza. "Where's Momochi?" asked Sasuke, looking over his shoulder at where they had come from. Naruto sighed to himself as his brother opened his mouth at the wrong time, reached over and pulled Sasuke out of the way, reacting as he felt the Oinen's motive in the force. The Oinen had launched a trio of Senbon needles at Sasuke, aiming for points that would severely hamper his ability to fight had they landed in his flesh. Naruto held up a hand and caught the Oinen in a force grip, holding her in place. "Was that necessary?" he asked, arching an eyebrow at the teen he immobilized. The Oinen's mask conveyed no emotion, though Naruto could feel both her terror and her anger. "Jedi," she spat from behind the mask. Naruto and Sasuke looked at each other in confusion, not understanding the meaning of the word. A whisper was all the warning they had as Zabuza's Kabikuri Hocho flew at them. Both dodged out of the way, Sasuke diving into a roll that left him in a crouched position and Naruto leaping atop the blade, changing the force grip to a throw, sending the Oinen flying at Zabuza, his arms still outstretched from throwing the blade. The blade embedded itself in a tree, forming a platform for Naruto to stand on. He looked back to see Zabuza reach up and grab the Oinen's wrist, pulling her out of the air to land on her feet, silent as a whisper. "Momochi Zabuza, the Kusagakure no Kijin, Nukanin of Kusagakure," stated Sasuke, jumping away from the empty ground to land on a tree branch the same level as the blade on which Naruto stood. "So you know who I am," said Zabuza, glaring at the pair. He looked sidelong at the female Oinen beside him. "They're making these knights younger than ever." "We're not knights," said Naruto, leaning on the tree. "Sure. That force grip and throw was pure coincidence." "Of course you're a knight," said Zabuza, reaching out to where his blade was stuck. Naruto was surprised when he felt the blade pull out of the tree of its own accord and felt the pull in the force. "Force users," he growled, drawing his Chikuto before spinning it into a reverse grip as he leapt off the tree and charged, Sasuke alongside him. Sasuke drew his hook swords and spun them in a figure 8, loosening up for battle. "I'll take the Oinen, you disable the Kijin," he said, charging the Oinen, blades swirling around him, the pattern simultaneously offensive and defensive. Naruto nodded as they split up, his blade parallel to his arm, the blunt edge pressed against his shoulder so that when he would attack he could quickly whip it into a lightning-fast underhand blow. Zabuza smirked beneath his mask of bandages and swung his heavy blade in a horizontal arc, seeing how the cloaked boy would react, already preparing to smack the boy out of the air for when he tried to jump over the blade. Naruto surprised him by dropping to his knees, avoiding the blade entirely and slid past the Nukenin, attacking with his own horizontal arc. Zabuza smirked as he dodged, finally enjoying a fight. The last Oinen he had fought had jumped over the blade and lost his head on the back swing. Springing back to his feet, Naruto and Zabuza crossed blades, Naruto's Chukuto holding back the monstrous blade of Kabikuri Hocho. They glared at each other over the blades, Zabuza's gray eyes meeting Naruto's blue eyes. "We're not going back to the temple," growled Zabuza, slowly forcing his blade closer to Naruto's head. "We'll die first, Knight." "I told you," said Naruto, halting Zabuza's blade, his eyes shifting to the crimson red they usually turned when he drew on Kyuubi's chakra. Naruto pressed his blade up, forcing Zabuza's up as well, leaving Zabuza's torso open to an attack, a fact which he took advantage as he planted a kick in Zabuza's solar plexus. Zabuza slid back a few feet, his blade resting on his shoulder as he held his stomach, gasping for breath. "Not bad, Knight." Dun Mach in combination with reverse Sheen. Haven't seen that combination for a long time. Naruto disappeared, blurring out of existence only to reappear by his opponent's shoulder. He quickly placed the Chikuto against his throat, almost hard enough to break the skin. "Surrender and take me to the girl you kidnapped," he growled, keeping Zabuza from retreating from the blade by holding the back of his neck in his other hand. "And I might not kill you." "I have no idea what you're talking about," said Zabuza, turning his head to look the teen in the eyes. He began to chuckle as a mist began to swirl around his feet. Zabuza pushed himself forward, slicing his throat open on the blade before turning to water. Naruto swore as he spun around, searching for Zabuza. Damn that bastard. He used the force to make it look like his Mizu Bushin was the real him. Now he's blocking me, thought Naruto as he drew on the force, attempting to pierce the fog Zabuza had placed on his seventh sense. "Naruto!" yelled one cycloptic Jonin, running into the fog where he had last seen his blonde pupil, drawing a pair of kunai to help guard his back. Sakura ran at his side, a kunai clutched in her own fist as she charged into the fog, trying to find her Sasuke-kun. Zabuza grinned as he threw his blade, letting it spin through the air in the direction of the Jonin's yell, aiming to bisect him at the sternum. "Stupid move, Knights, revealing your position like that," he thought as his blade whirred towards the cloaked Knight's reinforcements. Naruto heard the blade displacing air and immediately threw a forced push at his sensei and teammate, hoping to throw them to the ground so that the blade hidden in the mist would fly over top of them. Zabuza halted the push with one of his own, canceling out the telekinetic wave. Kakashi ducked and rolled as he heard the blade, allowing it to fly overhead and embed itself in the trees behind him. Naruto winced and cloused at his chest as he felt a disturbance in the force. Something is not right, no. Zabuza noticed the avoidance of his blade and casually flicked his hand, sending Kakashi and Sakura careening into a tree. Kakashi hit the tree with enough force to knock him out, falling bonelessly to the ground, nearly falling on his own drawn kunai. Sakura hit the ground with two thumps, her knees hitting the go-run first before slumping to the side. Her head reeled free, pink hair flying everywhere as her head tumbled about on the ground. Naruto felt the anger rise within him, the dark side whispering to him, taunting him, trying to make him call on it again so he could end the life of those who killed his friends. A deep breath calmed Naruto enough to remove the temptation of the dark side, allowing him to focus on the fight at hand. Mourning could be done later. Naruto focused, lowering his blade to his side as he listened for any whisper, for any movement on the air, a stray scent or movement that could be the precursor to an attack. Zabuza crept around the boy, his blade ready to attack the boy knight. He sent a wave of force at Naruto then quickly jumped over him, placing behind him as Naruto caught the push with his own manipulation of the force. Zabuza sped at the knight's unprotected back, drawing back the blade to diagonally bisect the teen. The teen cloaked in sand-colored clothes redirected the push, sending it towards Sasuke's fight. He then launched himself backwards, putting himself into stabbing range of Zabuza. Zabuza winced as he felt white-hot pain lance up from the right side of his stomach. Looking down, he saw the blade of Naruto's Chikudo entering his body 2 inches above his right hip and exit through his back, almost hitting his kidney on the way through him. Blood leaked out of the wound and down the blade of the sword, pooling beneath their feet. He felt a slight bit better as he saw that he wasn't the only one to take a hit. He had gotten in a blow as well. Naruto turned his head, staring at the blade that was now biting into his shoulder with a slight grimace of pain. Zabuza had pulled in his blade at the last second, placing the small section of blade near the hilt on a collision course with Naruto's shoulder. The result was Naruto's collarbone being split in 2 and his scapula gouged along with severed muscles and tendons. His blood dripped down his chest and back, soaking his clothes with a deep red. "Not bad, kid," said Zabuza, trying not to move lest he jostle the blade still through him. "Sorry, gotta finish this," said Naruto, giving his Chikudo a twist, causing Zabuza to flinch as the blade cut further into his flesh. The second was all Naruto needed to pull out the blade, use his free hand to force Kabikuri Hocho out of his shoulder, spin 360 degrees and neatly cut the blade off the hilt of Kabikuri Hocho. The blade fell off the hilt and stuck itself point first in the ground. Zabuza glared at the boy as he drew on the force and quickly sealed his wound, sighing as the pain faded enough for him to move without constant agony. He then reached to the top of the handle and gave it a twist, separating a 4-inch piece from the rest of the hilt. Naruto merely shrugged his shoulders, rolling his newly healed shoulder in preparation for whatever the Nukenin could possibly do now that his blade was separated from its hilt. A snap hiss filled the air as a green blade sprang from the hilt. "Fuck me," said Naruto, sheathing his Chikudo. Zabuza smiled as he thumbed a second switch on his saber handle. His blade extended from the normal 133 centimeters to 300, giving Zabuza a hell of a reach. "Fuck me sideways? How am I going to do this one?" "Get inside his attack range. A simple block at close range will allow us to attack much easier," said Kyuubi, pacing in Naruto's mindscape with a saber twirling idly between his fingers. "That reminds me. Why the hell am I not out there?" Naruto mentally nodded to the fox as he activated his own saber, slipping back into the Shin stance. Naruto and Zabuza charged, sabers crackling as they tangled and struck at each other, Naruto with his reversed Shin and Zabuza with his Nieman. They crossed blades, entering a saber lock with each glaring at the other over the red and green blades. "Surely you can do better," mocked Naruto, grinning at the man as he casually pushed the green saber to the side and planted a second kick in the man's solar plexus. Zabuza stumbled back, clutching his stomach and the now aggravated wound in his side, beginning to leak blood. "Healing was never my specialty," thought Zabuza as he panted. Zabuza charged, swinging the blade in wide arcs, never attacking at the same angle twice, his saber in continuous motion. Naruto smirked as he began to bat away the strikes, smirking as Zabuza began to lose his cool, his swings becoming wilder. Zabuza took a hand off his saber hilt and unleashed an arc of lightning at the blonde, hoping this change in tactics might give him an edge. Naruto raised his saber and caught the lightning on the fingers of his saber arm, stopping the lightning with barely a glance. As soon as Zabuza saw this, he cut off the electricity and swung his blade to guard his body, recognizing the ploy the teen was about to use. Naruto hurled the accumulated lightning back at the Nukenin, adding some of his own to boost the electricity. He smirked as Zabuza caught the force-turned lightning on his blade, momentarily blinding him from what Naruto was about to do. Naruto deactivated his saber and focused on manipulating the force. "This ends now." He tore the saber hilt from Zabuza's hand, flinging it away into the trees. He then caught Zabuza with a force grip before slamming a fallen log into him, driving him into a tree. Zabuza fell to his knees, his chest feeling like it had barely survived a meeting with a sledgehammer. "Can't this kid lay off the stomach shots?" Naruto then lifted him and dashed forward, using his momentum as he jumped to launch the both of them into the trees above. Zabuza landed back first, crashing into a tree branch. He slumped forward, an overwhelming feeling of agony keeping him from trying to focus his chakra or even break his fall. Naruto, however, had other ideas, catching a branch with one hand and the shirt of Zabuza in the other, spinning around to slam Zabuza face first into another tree branch, further aggravating his wounds. Zabuza was still reeling from the contact as he was pulled out of the impression he had made in the wood, flung down towards the ground and then accelerated to high speeds with the help of a forced push, effectively knocking him out as he slammed into the ground. Naruto landed beside him and placed his sabers back into their seals. "What took you so long?" he asked, not even looking at the battle-weary Uchiha who was busy pulling Senbon out of his right shoulder and chest. "Shut up. How did he and Sakura know we were out here?" asked Naruto, carrying Kakashi over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. He leaned him against a tree and lowered the unconscious Jonin into a sitting position, the one-eyed ninja's head lolling loosely on his shoulders. "Did you say anything? May I remind you that I was asleep when you came to pick me up from the complex?" asked Sasuke, sarcasm heavy in his voice. Naruto threw him a look as Kyuubi started laughing his ass off. "He's got you there, ya blonde idiot," chuckled the demon fox, an image of the yellow-eyed, red-haired human form appearing in Naruto's mind, his shoulders shaking with contained mirth. "True, we'll find out when he wakes up," said Naruto tiredly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This should not have happened, Kyuubi, he thought, placing a hand on the scroll at his belt. The scroll now contained the body of Haruno Sakura, a girl who died before her time. "Kakashi shouldn't have called out like that, stupid idiot," growled Kyuubi, his mood turning grim as he began to pace in Naruto's mindscape. "Furthermore, they never should have been here in the first place. There was a reason we didn't approach him or Sakura. Kakashi would go running to the Hokage and Sakura didn't have the experience for this mission. It's still my fault," thought Naruto, shaking his head slowly. "We'll have time to mourn later, back when we're in Konaha and Hinata is safe," said Kyuubi. "By the way, ask Sasuke about his fight. I want to hear about his experience fighting the ex-Jedi." "Hey, Sasuke, what did you think of this Haku's fighting ability?" Sasuke thought back to his fight as he applied iodine to the puncture wounds in his chest, wincing at the burn of the disinfectant before wrapping the injuries with some bandages. "She was very good, very, very good." Sasuke's fight? Sasuke charged, putting his hook swords through a figure 8 as he charged. His Sharingan blazed red between the flashes of mirror-like steel, the Oinin directly in front of him in a ready stance with Senbon glittering between her fingers. The woman flicked her arms in his direction, unleashing dual handfuls of Senbon needles, trying to perforate the last Uchiha, aiming to hit points on his body that would limit his movement, making him easier to kill. "Damn knights," she thought, dodging as he deflected the Senbon and slashed at her. 2 months since we left the temple and they're still after us." Sasuke growled as he threw himself into an aerial, narrowly dodging more Senbon that streaked to where his shoulders had been. He landed softly, almost cat-like, before rolling forward at his opponent, trying to stab the woman with his razor-sharp blades, his eyes allowing him to pinpoint where she would end up before she moved there. The Oinin cursed as she dropped 3 of the Senbon she was holding in her right hand, using the single steel needle to block the stab, redirecting it past her to hit nothing but air. Sasuke put pressure on his blade, trying to change the failed stab into a swing. His eyes widened as she resisted his attack, holding his blade at bay with a puny Senbon. The sound of steel grinding filled the air as the 2 combatants fought to overpower the other. "Not bad for a knight," she spat, pushing his blade back an inch. "Too bad you won't survive to report back to the masters. Not bad for an Oinin, but you forgot my other sword," growled Sasuke, smiling. He whipped his arm around, aiming to split the Oinin from crown to sternum. He could split the training logs back home with a little effort, so using a large amount of force would probably break a Senbon in twain. "Shit," thought Haku as she raised her other hand to stop the blow before realizing the action was pointless. Her Senbon would not withstand an assault of that magnitude. Making a split-second decision, she thrust out her palm, invoking the force to hurl the red-eyed knight into the air. "What the foo?" went through Sasuke's mind as he slammed back first into a tree, his sword slipping from his numbed fingers. He twitched in pain from his recent encounter with the natural fauna as he pulled himself into a crouch, casting his gaze about to find his swords. "She's got the same powers as Naruto. I wonder if she's got the same weapons." His musings was cut short as a trio of Senbon impacted his chest, their points digging into his right pectoral. His blades were out of reach, several meters behind him, so he had little choice. He had to pull out his new weapon. Haku's eyes widened behind her porcelain mask as the knight before her pulled a saber hilt from his ninja pouch. Damn, he wants to play rough, she thought as she replaced her senbon. With a snap hiss, the hum of Sasuke's red lightsaber filled the air, the mist crackling as it brushed against the blade. He smirked as he glanced at the blade, thinking he had the upper hand. He looked back and rolled his eyes, knowing that he'd just screwed himself. Haku smiled as she pulled her own saber from her belt, tossing the comforting weite from her left to her right. She flicked the activator, igniting the pale blue blade that joined the hum from the knight's crimson saber. Sasuke charged with his blade in the one-handed Makashi style. It was his favorite, despite his amusement at the names, as it was made for single combat. Sasuke preferred to fight one-on-one whenever he had the chance, though that was rare. He stopped in mid-charge, however, as the Oinin touched a second activation switch, igniting the blade on the other side of the handle. Eyes huge, he stared at the blue saber staff with a shocked look on his face. What he was feeling was summed up with two words: oh, damn. Haku smiled as she began to spin the saber, making it hum and crackle dangerously as both ends trailed through the mist. This duel is mine. Though as she knew most Jedi had little experience with a double-bladed saber master. Double-bladed Juyo was the hardest of the 7 forms to master, resulting from the added danger of a second blade. Practitioners would start off with a staff to learn basic moves, evolve to the use of a training saber, and then finally build their own saber staff. This kept inexperienced users from losing a limb or two, as the saber staff was twice as dangerous as a normal saber. Sasuke swallowed nervously. His Sharingan would give him an edge in the fight, his dojutsu allowing him to see the moves before they happened, though he was wary of the new development. Naruto mentioned that there were many unique types of sabers, never thought I'd see one first time out. He raised his blade and attacked, slicing toward her head with a quick overhand slice, using the tip of the blade to strike rather than the rest of the blade since both parts cut the same way. This tactic allowed the user to launch attacks from extreme range, keeping him or her from harm by keeping them out of reach of their opponent's blade. Haku blocked easily before countering with a savage underhand blow, making the knight scramble to avoid the lethal edge of the other half of her saber. She pressed the attack, pushing him back against a tree as she continually used both sides of the saber staff. Sasuke cursed as he raised his blade overhead, angling the blade down to put it parallel to his back, blocking a slash at his back. His momentary triumph was short-lived as the Oinin quickly performed a 180 and struck at his front with the other side of her saber staff, forcing him to move quickly to bring his own blade to block. Their sabers flashed and crackled in the mist, throwing out bursts of light as the energy blades tangled and locked. Sasuke was hard-pressed to defend himself, having to block twice as many attacks as the Oinin twirled her saber staff with precision and skill. Damn, if Naruto didn't show me these forms, I wouldn't have lasted this long, thought Sasuke, ducking a strike at his head. Thinking quickly, Sasuke faked an overhand before twirling the saber into an upward arc, slicing the saber hilt in half, making one half short out and die. He grinned as he successfully executed one of the harder marks of contact Naruto had told him about. Haku was surprised, to say the least, as she looked at the severed handles of her saber. The bastard pulled a sun gem. Damn it, I spent 2 months building this thing, she thought as she held the broken handle in her left and her still functioning blade in her right. Her musings were cut short by a turning back kick to the stomach, giving her a small amount of airtime before she went slamming painfully into the ground. Sasuke leapt over her in an almost aerial flip, twisting in mid-air to slash at the prone opponent. He frowned as his slash was blocked by the remaining saber the Oinin held, forcing him to attack again as he landed. Haku kipped, avoiding the strike aimed at her neck. As soon as she was on her feet she threw herself forward, putting some space between her and her opponent. She heard the knight growl as she felt rather than saw his crimson blade pass within an inch of her neck as he spun and delivered a second strike. My leap forward kept my head on my shoulders, she thought as she turned to fight the knight, who was already charging, his saber held in both hands now. Is he using? She trailed off as the knight made an attack. He launched himself overhead, bypassing her readied blue saber to land behind her. The Oinin spun, bringing her lightsaber up horizontally to stop the heavy blow Sasuke was delivering. They locked sabers, Sasuke slowly pushing his saber towards her throat as she resisted. Sasuke, being of greater strength and height, slowly drove the Oinin's saber back, bringing his closer to her throat. In a bold move, one that Zabuza would have disapproved of, Haku took one hand off her hilt and thrust it in front of the knight's face, using a force push to launch him backwards. He rolled a few times, smacking his head hard before landing face down in the dirt beside one of the many trees, his deactivated saber hilt just in front of him, its kill switch shutting off the lethal blade. "Not bad, knight," said Haku, walking towards the downed warrior, her saber raised to deliver the final blow. "I'm sorry it had to end this way." Sasuke smirked, his head still down as if stunned. "Her mind is focused on the fight, not the fact that I'm planning an ambush," he thought, thinking back to a time when Naruto had sparred with him. Sasuke thought his friend was crazy when he went as far as to blindfold himself, though somehow the blonde always knew whenever Sasuke was playing possum with him, despite his lack of vision. Naruto explained that his control of the force was good enough to allow him to sense intentions during the match, giving him something akin to a sense of battlefield omniscience. Even when Sasuke confronted him with various hidden cage bunshin, Naruto had known where every single one of them were, using the force to give him a view of the battlefield uninhibited by camouflage or illusions. Sasuke blanked his mind, as he did when Naruto had run out in the middle of the night, leaving to meet up with his Niwishi partner. Naruto hadn't sensed him that time, so Sasuke hoped it would work for her as well. Haku raised her saber in both hands, preparing a strike to slice off the knight's head. Before she could begin the downswing, she felt a disturbance in the force. Half turning, she looked over her shoulder, wondering why her senses were tingling, to find a gigantic force push approaching at high speeds. "Shit," thought Haku as she dropped her saber in surprise and hastily summoned her own force power to counter the push. Sasuke watched grimly as the Oinin was shot through the air for an instant before slamming into the tree he laid by, the force of her impact shaking a few leaves loose from the branches above. "Thanks, Naruto, I owe you one." He got back to his feet, brushing the dirt from his clothing as he hooked his foot beneath the metal cylinder that was now his favorite weapon. A flick of his foot had the saber hilt flying up to shoulder level, allowing him to snag it out of the air. Sasuke smiled as he held the warm hilt and thumbed the activation switch, unleashing his crimson blade once again. He turned to the Oinin, preparing to finish the battle with what Naruto called a side cha. The Oinin struggled to pull herself into a sitting position, the impact on unyielding tree leaving her very dizzy, likely suffering from a concussion. Her mask fell from her face, the chakra she had been circulating to hold it in position now gone as her control was lost. Sasuke froze as he looked upon her face, halting his saber in mid-swing. Long black hair framed a delicate face, her brown eyes at half-mast. Her lip was bleeding, a trail of blood running down to her chin. Sasuke couldn't complete the swing, something stopping him from ending the woman's life. He was confused by his reluctance, so he settled for deactivating his saber and pinching a nerve cluster in her neck, a move Naruto had shown him should the fangirls overwhelm him. The girl slumped, her breathing peaceful as she fell unconscious. Sasuke wondered why he felt this way as he tied the girl's arms together at the wrists and elbows, just as his brother had taught him. "I'll have to speak to Naruto about this. Present time, he's feeling the force." "Well, to a small extent, anyways," said Kyuubi through his mental link with his container. "That's why he didn't kill this, Haku. It'll take a while for his power to fully manifest itself, though I sense he will be powerful, almost like you." Naruto grinned as he relayed his info to Sasuke, whose eyes widened at the new info. "I could do what you do," he said in an awestruck voice, looking at his own hands with an inquisitive eye. "Perhaps, given some training," said Naruto, chuckling as his brother attempted to use a force push, imitating Naruto's movements from a demonstration he had given some time ago. "I said after some training, idiot. You're not going to use push or pull right away." Sasuke opened his mouth to retort when a groan interrupted him. Both force users, experienced and not, turned towards their sensei, who seemed to be coming around, rubbing his head with one hand and his eyes with the other. "Somebody get the number of that thing that hit me," he groaned, holding his head with both hands as his head began to pound. He looked up at his pupils, both of whom were glaring at the Jonin. What? Why are you here, Hitaki? Growled out Naruto, his eyes flashing red and his nails lengthening into claws as he walked over to the teacher. Grabbing a handful of his teacher's flak vest, he pulled him to his feet, bringing him to eye level, crimson orbs boring into the one uncovered gray. Why did you bring Sakura? Kakashi's eyes widened as he realized he didn't see Sakura among them, a quick look around confirming that. A feeling of dread filled him as he looked Naruto in the eye. Where is she? Naruto dropped him and pulled the scroll from his belt. Handing the scroll to him, he said, "She's in here." Kakashi was silent for a moment before he slammed his fist into the tree he had been leaning against. A crack filled the air as one of the bones in his fist popped. As if pain did not affect him, he started slamming his fists into the tree, not reinforcing his limbs with chakra or limiting his power to protect his fists. Damn it, he growled out as the skin on his fists was stripped away, blood flowing freely from his knuckles. A tear fell from his uncovered eye as he sank to his knees. I should never have brought her along. Yes, you shouldn't have. Hello Kyuubi, said Kakashi, nodding at the demon fox. He made as if to get up, though he quickly sat back down as his head started to throb painfully. Easy, Hitaki. You're no good to us if you injure yourself further, said Kyuubi, holding up his hand to forestall Kakashi's movements. We'll give you some medical treatment once we're done with our interrogation. At Kakashi's questioning look, Kyuubi pointed to the two-bound ninja. Kakashi raised his eyebrow as he recognized Zabuza, noting that he looked like he had been put through the ringer while his genin looked like they had gone through a stroll in the forest, although Sasuke had a little dirt on his clothing. Who fought the Kijin? Sasuke and Kyuubi pointed at Naruto, who was whistling innocently as he leaned against a tree. Impressive, said Kakashi, looking at Naruto with newfound respect. He opened his mouth to ask another question, but was interrupted by Sasuke. Kakashi-sensei, we have bigger issues than how Naruto took down Zabuza. We have to find out where they took Hinata. Kakashi nodded as he stood, wincing as he brushed his knuckles against the rough tree bark. You're right, finding Hinata takes priority. Naruto nodded as he and Sasuke walked over to the downed shinobi. Kyuubi dispelled himself, going back into the mindscape as to practice his forms for when he was needed. Naruto delivered a kick to the Nukanen's side, aiming just above his stab wound. The effect was instantaneous, Zabuza jerking awake with a shout filled with pain. Haku awoke as soon as Zabuza screamed, throwing herself against her bonds in an attempt to defend her master. Sasuke ignited his saber and held the glowing blade at her throat, shaking his head in warning. She glared at him, her eyes filled with anger, but she stopped pulling at the ropes that bound her. Sasuke lowered his blade, thought kept it ignited. He hoped he didn't have to use it. Momochi Zabuza, your reputation precedes you, Kusagakure no Kijin, said Naruto, pacing just out of reach of Zabuza's legs, his arms crossed with his saber hilts in hand. I would be lying if I said I knew of you, Jedi scum, retorted Zabuza, conveying an anger-filled glare through his mask of bandages. You're all the same, watching for that damned prophecy child. Ah, that prophecy thing my friends told me about. What exactly does it entail? Zabuza growled, straining his muscles against his bindings. Naruto raised an eyebrow as he heard the bindings groan in response. How would you not know, Jedi? All knights know of the prophecy. Naruto crouched in front of him, spinning his saber hilts through his fingers as he looked into Zabuza's eyes. I am not a Jedi, nor am I a knight. I don't know what you are talking about. Zabuza was silent for a few moments, using the force to ascertain the truth. Naruto allowed Zabuza's mental touch, though he kept himself ready should the force user choose to attack. Your words seem truthful, said Zabuza, looking at him with questioning eyes. Who are you? I am Namikaze Naruto, Sukapu no Kijin, genin of Konaha. Zabuza raised an eyebrow, well, acted as if he did. The Kijin from K's no Kuni, I've heard of you. Enter stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. If you take what you do not own, you shall pay in blood and bone. If you don't wish for idiocy's cure, beware the Kijin of Sukapu. Zabuza chuckled as he recited the little poem he'd heard in a Kusagakure bar when he was meeting a client. A pair of bandits had just arrived from K's and was relaying the message to all the other bandits in the tavern, telling stories of how a man who decimated bandit groups as they attacked caravans. His blades glowed red as his eyes, causing sandstorms with a wave of his hand and tossing a rank Nukanen around like nothing. Zabuza had not given it much thought, thinking the men were still scared of every shadow. Frightened men were prone to exaggeration. "That's you, isn't it?" Naruto nodded the affirmative, chuckling to himself about the sad little poem he had created on the spot to scare the bandits. Zabuza looked over to Haku, noting that she was trying to work her way out of her bonds. "Haku, we have no quarrel with these men any longer." Haku nodded, ceasing her struggles, though she kept a glare on her face as she watched Sasuke. Naruto nodded to Sasuke as he ignited his black saber, quickly slicing through the rope that kept Zabuza tied to the tree. Sasuke did the same, his blade a crimson arc as he freed Haku. "We have no fight with you, Kijin, so we ask that you let us go," said Zabuza, picking up the blade of Kabikuri Hocho and slipping it onto his back. He stuck the lightsaber hilt in his belt along with the small damaged section that would have connected blade to hilt. "We need to know where they would have taken my friend," said Naruto, an edge to his voice as he glared at the Nukanen. "Where would they take the supposed child of the prophecy?" Zabuza pointed northeast, the Jedi Temple, about 50 miles that way. "All the knights live there, so don't expect a rescue mission to be easy, especially if they have the true prophesized one." Zabuza made as if to jump away, though stopped and turned back to Naruto. The Jedi Knights were the protectors of Nami no Kuni for 1,000 years. They have had years to refine their arts, master their saber forms, and control the Force. They are not enemies to engage lightly. "We will rescue our comrade. Then may the Force be with you, Kijin." With a nod to Kakashi and Sasuke, Zabuza and Haku walked into the forest, heading northwest as to bypass Konaha. Sasuke let out a sigh as the pair disappeared, breathing easy now that the two potential enemies were gone. "Well, we have our heading. What should we do now?" Naruto sat down and leaned against a tree, drawing a whetstone and his chikuto. With a rasp of stone on steel, he said, "We need a plan. We can't just waltz in and demand Hinata back." Kakashi nodded as he sat by Naruto, bandaging his knuckles. "So, what do we do?" "I have an idea, if you're willing to hear it," said Kyuubi, a plan springing to mind. A minute later, Kakashi took a few calming breaths before looking Kyuubi in the eye. "You are insane. This will never work." Sasuke nodded, agreeing with his sensei's apt description of Kyuubi and his plan. "This is suicide," he added, flipping the saber hilt in his hand. "We can't possibly get that to work." They both turned to Naruto, who was still looking at the plans Kyuubi had drawn out in the dirt. He looked up with a small grin on his face, the details for amendments to the plan finally clicking in his mind. Sasuke and Kakashi felt a shiver of fear as Naruto's grin widened, forming that feral smirk they learned to be very afraid of. "Let's do it."
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.